Good morning, members, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Welcome to our December NPA. So it's just gone 9:30, so we'll get started on the agenda. So the item one is the live stream recording. As members know, we'll be starting the recording now for those who want to watch us online. That sounds quite echoey. Two is the emergency evacuation. I don't think we're expecting a taxi, so if there is a fire alarm, it's out onto the lawn in orderly fashion. Item three is apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Abida Nayar, Jane Harper, Joy Andrews, John McHugh and Arnold Warneken.
Any more? Okay, thanks, Judith. So, on to four, and it is the public minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of September, which I think should be there on the agenda. Are we happy to take those? So, yeah. Record of the meeting. Thank you. At five, public question time. I don't think we have any public questions notified. George.
Thank you, Chair. I thought that probably as part of the public questions part of the meeting, it might be helpful to highlight at the very start of today's gathering the very important, momentous day that we celebrate because on the 16th of December 1949, the National Parks and Access to the Countryside Act was granted royal assent, and obviously that act has led to the creation of the national parks and what's now known as the national landscapes, and of course had provisions for public access as well. So for all those who are watching online, I think it was pure coincidence that today's meeting coincided with the 75th anniversary, but certainly as a member of the National Park Authority, as the chair of the Joint Advisory Committee of the Howardian Hills National Landscape, as someone who has been involved with setting up a trail within and starting and ending in Helmsley, visiting going through the churches around the area, I feel extremely proud about what our part of Ryder and North Yorkshire has to offer. A big component of that has been due to this act. So I thought that for today it might be a nice way to highlight it at the beginning of the meeting, but I believe that it will be discussed further down the agenda as well about some of the updates and some of the things that are happening. There was a feature yesterday on the BBC in Country File, and that was also very inspiring to watch, and certainly on a personal level made me so proud to be part of this fantastic national parks family.
Thank you, George. Nice to bring that to members' attention at the start, and certainly interestingly, I think it was a visionary piece of legislation just after the Second World War, and interestingly, some of the purposes and reasons and motives behind that then are still very much the case now. So anyway, we shall touch on it later on the agenda. We do have no public questions. So at six, members are reminded to declare their personal or prejudicial interests, should they have one, and there's a sheet of paper to note the nature of that interest to help us document it, should you have one. And then item 7, onto the stuff. It's the management plan update and annual monitoring statement. And I think Paul is going to take us through this.
So this item concerned the management plan. Every year we do an annual monitoring statement saying how we're getting along against our 24 objectives in our management plan. It's before members now. This is the second one we've done. Of those 24 objectives, 13 are slightly behind target, 11 are going okay. Just a quick point, just to let you know, in the report there is a slight error in paragraph 4.1. The diagram is correct, but the paragraph isn't. So flip the other way in the report. But no, but that diagram is correct. So that's the state of play. I'm not going to go through these in great detail. I kind of just want to open it up to questions really, but just say in terms of what we think is on target, it's those ones. So peak restoration soil, dark skies, peace tranquility, protective of nature, and so on and so forth. The ones that we're slightly behind on are those ones, which is climate change, woodland creation, water quality, bigger, better, and more gentle habitats, functioning ecosystems, sustainable management moorland, designated high risk, and the remainder. So it's all down in your report in terms of where we are behind. And just to let you know in terms of what's happening nationally and what might change next year, I think I've spoken to you before about the protected landscapes targets and outcomes framework. So these are 10 national indicators that we're going to have to incorporate into our management plan. We've been given some data by government. So for 5 of them, we've got some baseline data for last year. Those are included in the report. But for next year, we'll have to incorporate those targets into our management plan. There's quite a lot of work happening in terms of getting the data together on those. So some of the data we currently don't have for 5 of those indicators. And some data we don't have, particularly in terms of what's happening under countryside stewardship and environmental land management schemes. So in particular, what's happening on farms, we haven't got data from Natural England at the moment. So that's a bit of an omission in the report. So particularly on woodland creation and on peatland restoration, we're probably missing some data in this report so far, but hopefully that will rectify itself next year. At which point I'll open it up to questions.
Three legs up, imagine. Colin.
There was two graphs up there, sets of one was online, one was on time, one was behind time. They were both. There's 2 moorland ones. Now one was up to date and one was behind. You know, what was the difference? I mean, moorland's moorland. What was the difference between the two? That was all.
Just check on the report itself. There's an objective on sustainable management of moorland, which we are behind on slightly. I mean, one thing to say is in terms of marking on things, there is a certain element of kind of judgment on how we mark these things, just kind of how we feel as officers in terms of how we're getting on. There is an element of judgment in how we mark these things, but basically Bryony and team have marked those particular objectives. So there's one on sustainable management of moorland, which we think we're slightly behind on. And the other one off the top of my head, I will need to check.
Yeah.
Tom, did you want to
I can probably clarify. As you say, there's a degree of subjectivity that we and partners have when we're assessing how we think we're doing as a national park in the delivery of the 24 objectives. I think in relation to that one, which is Objective 8, the objectives measured on the basis of enhancements of moorland fringe habitat. And I think although there's some great work that the Moorland Association are leading in terms of convening a moorland forum, I think in terms of the delivery of improvements in terms of moorland fringe habitat, which is the way we measure it, we don't have sufficient levels of data and robustness around data to be able to give us the confidence to say that we think that that's on target or not, hence why it's marked as an amber rather than a green.
Malcolm.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think it's a really good report. I think there's a huge amount of information in, but as you say, Paul, there's, and you were just saying, Tom, that there's an element of subjectivity about it, which is inevitable. And also, I mean, there's some information that we're not getting, and it'd be useful to fill those gaps, certainly. I think in some ways the other thing I'd just like to see is maybe a bit of discussion about what the problems are. It just seems to me that some of the national targets for both the climate and for biodiversity, I mean, they seem to me to be incredibly challenging. and they also seem to be incredibly difficult to measure, all these sorts of things. So I'm less concerned with the precise numbers and things. It's more, what's the feel of things? How are we doing? Are we likely to get there? You know, what's been the problems, the exterior problems that we've no involvement in that are causing us issues? It's that sort of thing. I bet maybe we'd like to be teased out a bit more. If I can just get a little bit parochial, as you know, Paul, from the chats that we've had. But it's just, I think it's on page 60, there's a comment that Billsdale was provided with some fast broadband. Residents of Billsdale will be surprised about that statement. I know it came from NYMNPA. I could explain in lots of detail why that would be. I'll suffice to say that a company who got a contract did come to our village hall and explained to us that we were going to get this fantastic broadband in the next year, and it simply didn't happen for all sorts of reasons. The good news is another contractor's been let and we're included in that contract. The maybe not so good news is it's the same company, but we're hopeful that this time they will actually deliver it. Although the northern bit of Billsdale is supposed to be happening fairly soon, and the southern bit is not until 2026. But that's just an example of you being provided with information that, you know, for no fault of your own is wrong. So just minor correction there. We can sort the details out later. Thanks, Chair.
And just in terms of, in some ways, you kind of need to read the report because some of those are kind of more behind than others. So some are slightly behind, and some of them are more behind. Generally speaking, I say the ones that are particularly behind. Woodland creation is behind, but as I say, we don't have countryside stewardship data. But as an authority, we've been planting quite a lot of trees, but I'm aware that other organisations haven't done so much of late. The other ones I think are behind. Affordable homes is particularly behind. We haven't delivered any affordable homes for the last couple of years, which I'm acutely aware of. And probably wilder, more functioning ecosystems. We've got lots of work kind of gearing up, but it's yet to deliver so far. So I'll particularly pick those three as particularly not of concern, but of particular areas that we're going to have to work on in the future.
Yeah, just to add to Paul's comments there, I mean, welcome the challenge and the feedback, Malcolm, and definitely when we look at the next iteration of this in December of next year, we'll try and add a bit more kind of qualitative analysis of, particularly on those targets where we're off track. A couple of things to sort of draw out from that, though. The first is that this is not just about us in the National Park Authority. We're heavily reliant, particularly for a number of objectives that lie outside of our sphere of competence, for delivery and input from partners. And actually what's been great in this report is to get even more input from partners to ensure that it's not just a report that comes from the National Park Authority, but the same goes for their analysis of how well we're doing in terms of delivery. And one of the announcements I'm hoping we'll get today is that the non-statutory guidance that relates to the new clause that was introduced to the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act that requires relevant authorities to seek to further statutory purposes will be published in the course of the coming days, which I think will help in terms of putting a bit more onus on the need to ensure that relevant authorities play their full part in delivering statutory purposes in due course national park management plans. I think the second thing, and Paul's report really draws this out, is to draw attention to the fact that our reporting framework will need to evolve in line with the new Protected Landscapes Targets and Outcomes framework. Those are targets that we will need to demonstrate our achievement towards, and Paul's sought to introduce, where we can, some objectivity rather than subjectivity that comes through that data. At the moment, the data is incomplete for a number of reasons that are not entirely in Natural England's gift to solve in the here and now. But we're confident, I think, by this time in December of next year, we'll be able to do a more objective as well as subjective job in analysing performance against the delivery of those targets, which we'll need to retrofit into the management plan in the next 6 months.
Thanks for that, Tom. I got Janet and then Heather.
Yeah, you couldn't see.
Sort yourselves out, yeah.
I do appreciate that, you know, there are some things particularly to do with Billsdale about, you know, the broadband, etc. But there's some quite good things that we've done in here, you know, and I'm just wondering, it's very difficult to compare us to other national parks, obviously, Paul, because they've got different landscapes. But would you suggest, I mean, obviously, you probably do have engagement with other parks. Do you think we're doing pretty well compared to the rest? I mean, they've all got targets and things like this. I mean, do we sort of like speak to each other and get some feedback to see if we, you know, what's any sort of suggestions from them?
We'll speak to each other, but I couldn't hand on heart tell you how we're getting on compared to other national parks. I think one of the advantages of this protected landscapes targets and outcomes framework is that we'll have 10 indicators which we share. We do have family indicators as well which we share, but this is specifically measuring our management plan, and it's not just us, it's our partners as well. But I think it's probably one to think about in the future in terms of how we're getting on in the background of that protected landscapes framework, actually, in terms of how we're all doing between ourselves.
Well, that's fine. Now, it wasn't trying to compare everything.
Yeah.
I just thought it's helpful as well.
Thanks, Heather. No, Janet?
Thanks, and thanks, Paul. It's a really good report. Thank you very much indeed. It's easy to follow and to read. One of the things that I'm interested in is the cumulative effect of all these targets that aren't where they should be, and how that plays out in terms of resource and staffing. And because when you, for no fault perhaps of anybody's, things aren't where they should be, well, there's an effect on that. And it's really trying to understand what that cumulative effect is to our overall objectives. And also a bit of a plug for the 2-4er as well, where we are scrutinising these. So this is going to give us opportunities to look next year about some of the things that we can do as members to try and help and support to bring these back on track. So it was just if you could give me an idea, if it's possible to say what that cumulative impact might be. And also you mentioned that we'd get further information next year. And I just wondered if that could be a bit more specific, that when the information might be available that's missing. Thanks, Paul.
That's quite a big question.
Yes, apologies for that.
In terms of kind of where we are behind, particularly, I would mention woodland creation. We're running at about kind of half our target as a national park as a whole. As I said, we're doing an awful lot of work through our Section 106 ourselves as an authority. But as I said, we are missing a lot of data from Natural England about what's happening on farms. Now, I'm hoping that's going to be rectified next year. But that is a challenging target. We always knew when we put it in the management plan it was going to be a challenging target. And the other one I would say is probably affordable housing. As I say, we've got schemes in the pipeline, but they're being incredibly slow to come to completions, basically. So if I can probably mention two that we are behind on, and this is only year 2, bear in mind, it'd be those two. Do I have Tom wants to add to that? Or?
I think I'll pick up your second question, Janet. I think we'll have greater clarity on the baseline indicators under the targets and outcomes framework come April next year, which is when Natural England are committed to kind of give us the sort of the full suite. I know there's still some there's still some challenges around defining what's meant by nature-friendly farming, for example. So how you kind of translate that into a set of objective statistics needs a bit of work. In fact, I've got a meeting tomorrow as part of the external advisory group that's working with Natural England and DEFRA, looking at the targets and outcomes framework with some of my national responsibilities. So we're quite heavily involved in all of that. On your first point, it's a really, really good challenge. And it applies across every national park and across every national landscape, because the ability to achieve quite challenging, rightly so, targets around climate, nature, people and place requires powers, tools and resources to achieve that. And if I just deal on the resources front, leave aside the debate about our own resources as a national park authority and the piece on Countryfile yesterday evening. But in order to win the hearts and minds of primarily farmers and landowners to do the right thing in terms of nature and climate in the national park, you've got to make sure the whole policy incentives work well. And that's about tens of millions of pounds that are invested through countryside stewardship, sustainable farming incentive, in due course landscape recovery, all needing to work. And I think sometimes that point is a little bit overlooked by the government, and it needs to work in order to ensure that the ambitions that we have are delivered.
Thanks, I totally agree with that. If we can't influence the levers that are happening in our national park, then when you cross the line into the national park, you know, why is it not different? And it needs to be different. So that is a really important point. We'll keep pushing on that. Anybody else? Chris? I was going to ask, actually, you did mention the affordable housing. I was just going to ask a little bit as to why.
Yeah, thanks, Chair.
That really
that's a subject I did want to just say something about affordable housing. Yeah, I think it needs saying publicly. On a positive note, I do feel that the difficulty of delivering affordable housing in the national park is always there as a problem, and I also believe we've got a very proactive and positive approach, particularly with local housing associations, and that we will meet that target, and it'll come at the end of all those schemes in the pipeline will come through. I do believe that will happen. The one thing that is worrying is we've had some kickback from a number of our communities, and it's quite frustrating and disappointing that some of that has seemed to be a coordinated response against us investigating housing schemes. I won't name those communities. But one thing that came through on one recently was that we're really only interested in affordable housing to meet our targets as an authority, which is absolutely, irrelevant. This is about actually making sure our communities remain as sustainable via communities, and we want to deliver affordable housing for the social and the economic good of the national park. So what we're going to do is we're going to implement some really good comms, really good positive comms about the schemes that we have delivered, the benefit of those schemes to those communities, and try and get the people actually living in those affordable houses to come forward and speak about that as well. So about where they're from, what their job is, what their contribution is to that village life, where their kids go to school, to actually persuade people that this is about doing something that's good for our communities. It's not about us and meeting targets. So I just think there's a really strong programme for action to go out there and tell a good story. And that's something we're going to try and do next year to overcome that. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chris. It's useful to understand that. And I saw in the news, I think the Yorkshire Dales are looking to create principal residency with a big splash in the news. We did that some time ago. Maybe we should have made more of it. But they're important things, important tools for sustaining our viability and our duty to local economic and social well-being.
Clive.
I'll take Clive and then Malcolm, and perhaps it's time to be moving along.
I was just going to ask a second, do you think one of the problems is with the villagers and the public, they think that the national park is just the planning authority for it and not the other, and maybe because North Yorkshire Council actually do the initial work of going down looking for affordable housing schemes. And do you think we should be looking at actually being more, I think your idea of showing proactive things is good, but actually more than that. I know we've been to some meetings and it's been quite very horrendous. It's been very disheartening, to be honest. Is there anything else we could do as at these meetings and to put our thoughts forward?
I mean, just in terms of how we approach affordable housing, we do co-fund rural housing enablers who are employed by North Yorkshire Council. But having said that, we are at parish meetings actively asking communities to bring forward land and get engaged with affordable housing. So is the perception that it's North Yorkshire Council and not us? I don't think it is, I would argue. But having said that, I think we can do a better job in terms of marketing the benefits of these schemes for a community. And the one thing I'm very conscious of, we've got some really good schemes in this national park, and we don't shout about them enough. And it does make a difference when they get built.
I'll just come back. One of the problems with the enablers, they are North Yorkshire Council. If I want to contact Colin Hubie, I contact him through North Yorkshire Council, not through the National Park. And I just wondered whether we could tweak that a bit more so people are actually going through the National Park to get these enablers as well.
They can do it either way, to be honest. I mean, I've stood up at parish council meetings and parish forums and said, and given my email address out saying get in touch. Obviously, I know Colin quite well, so I can get in touch with Colin. There's nothing stopping people going to our neighbours directly, but ideally they ought to be coming through us so we're kind of aware of what's going on. But no, there is a gap in terms of how we kind of communicate, how we deliver affordable housing to our communities, and I'm very conscious next year we kind of very much need to close that gap.
Malcolm?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I mean, clearly it's right that we try and increase publicity to say the benefits, but it just occurred to me that parish councils and parish council members have a role to play in this, because I can understand why some communities may be concerned, because as you know, we've got a couple of affordable housing schemes in Chopgate. We've had them for some years now, and initially there was concern about it. Whatever you may say about that concern, it just struck me that if there are these parish councils that are and communities that are concerned, just tell them to get in touch with the parish councils who already have them, because they are, as Paul said, they're huge benefits to the local community. And I'd be very pleased if anybody contacted me, and I'll tell them exactly what our experience has been, which has been entirely good and beneficial.
Heather?
Affordable housing, I mean, you're absolutely right, we need it, but we do need to make sure, and again, this, I'm not aware exactly our policy, but there's certain issues I'm not going to name the parish, but it is in the national parks where on the last year there's been problems regarding the tenancy and who's getting the tenancy, and some antisocial type behaviour which is carried out. I'm not, as I say, I'm not going to raise it actually exactly where it is, which is causing great consternation within the parishes about the rules and regulations. And in fact, I think one of the parish clerk told me, or the parish chair, that she'd been in touch with Richard Smith to get some clarification about who gets these housing. So I agree, affordable housing, but I think we've got to tie everything up a little bit more, because not every village wants them or would welcome any more affordable housing based on the history of some existing locations. I'm not trying to. I just think whatever going forward, we've got to make it absolutely clear. As I say, I'm not sure if each affordable housing has different sort of like rules and regulations, but there's certainly consternation on one particular parish. Thank you.
I'm aware, Heather. I mean, when a house does become free, it ought to go to somebody in that parish, and the Section 106 sets that out. I am aware on one or two occasions that hasn't happened, and we need to talk to the registered social landlords about that, and we will write out to them, reminding them that they need to notify us if they're contemplating doing that. So I can commit to you now that we'll write out to the registered social landlords, just explain that they ought to be passing their house on to somebody locally, unless they absolutely can't find somebody locally. So it's an issue, but I think it's a handful of people. I think it's not a widespread issue, but I'm aware that as soon as one parish finds that that's happened, word spreads.
So I just come back. It happened to be two residents in the same particular space. I mean, I think I will go along to the AGM of this particular housing association just to back that up. But thank you.
Janet?
I'll just be brief this time, Paul. Please, could you just confirm how this links to the housing needs survey? So we're agreeing we need affordable homes because we know so, because we have a housing needs survey, don't we? And there is a link there. So by all means, yes, we must then explain clearly the benefits of this to keep communities sustainable. That's the point, isn't it? So I just want to, please, could you confirm it does link to the housing needs survey that is produced by the North Yorkshire Council?
There's two sorts of housing needs survey. So North Yorkshire Council will do their own housing strategy. But normally what happens is if a parish thinks it needs affordable housing, one of our rural housing enablers will do a local survey, which is basically questionnaires going through letterboxes, which will flush out whether there's any need. And the reason we do that is because the registered social landlords need some certainty that there is the demand there to build the housing. But it's done very locally. It's done by surveys. So if there are any parishes that think they may need some affordable housing, I would urge them to get in touch with us, and we will ask our rural housing enablers to do a survey for that parish.
We've had a good discussion, and you know, the purpose of this is basically to flag up where things need looking at, and I think, you know, this discussion's confirmed that we will continue to be looking at that. And I can understand that, you know, there's a lot of talk in the news about increasing housing development, and that's been a continuing theme from governments for some time. And I can understand how that might create unease in local communities. But for the national park, it's absolutely about making sure that our local communities are sustainable and able to fulfil their duty of helping our socio and economic well-being. And I think actually I did some work with the Foundation for Common Land on a related issue, which I can speak to you about later. But maybe we haven't actually been spending enough time, you know, with local communities to actually identify the issues, the concerns, the various stakeholders, and to get that out in the open. And you know, sometimes we do a consultation and then we sort of compile the responses, but what we should be doing perhaps is compiling those conflicting responses in the same room with the responders. Be interesting. We could have a look at that, but I do think it's definitely about sort of openness, trust, and building awareness. And I think that the work that we have done in the North York Moors is great over the time, and as you say, we've delivered a lot, and maybe haven't shouted so much about it. Anything else on the report? This is I got off my phone. Oh, the other thing I was just going to say is section 5. It's great to have the feedback from the annual stakeholder forum too. As Tom said, you know, a really important part is not just what we're doing; it's what our partners think we're doing and they're doing. And so, good to have that report here. Unfortunately, I wasn't at the event myself, but that probably made it half an hour shorter. So, okay. So the recommendation on page, whichever it is that members note the contents of the report and offer any comments. Briefly, we did have a talk about whether noting was the right thing. I mean, members could accept the report or they're happy to note it. I think the report has done its work, so if you're happy with that recommendation. You can? Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Paul. On then to the medium-term financial strategy, on page 84. This is Pete.
Morning, everybody. So hopefully, yeah. So we've got a few slides. For those who were at FRASC last month, you'll have seen these slides before. So this paper's been through FRASC already, with comments taken from that to recommend on to this authority. The slides remain the same. The paper remains broadly the same as that went to FRASC. It's just been updated for a couple of small areas, including just the latest inflation numbers in the paper. And also just a little bit of the wording around the DEFRA grant, etc., and latest conversations on that. Otherwise, it remains broadly the same, the deficit remains the same, and therefore all of the kind of ethos of the paper remains the same as that seen at FRASC. So just a few slides to run through. First of all, what the medium-term financial strategy is. We bring it every year. It's a 5-year view to have a look at the financial sustainability of the authority. It's based on a very broad set of assumptions and really just rolling forward last year's budget assumptions for the further 5 years, just to see where we are and what our future issues look like, so we can address issues in advance. How does it differ from the budget? Well, in February, March, we'll bring to FRASC in February and NPA in March the detailed budget. That will be the really detailed look at next year, where members will approve next year's budget in considerable detail. This paper really just looks at that financial sustainability broad level assumptions picture. And then how does it tie into the business plan? Well, the business plan and the MTFS go hand in hand every year. The MTFS is built deliberately to underpin the business plan. So everything within the business plan and what we do in the business plan is funded within this picture. And therefore, whatever deficit picture we sort of produce and bring is illustrating the deficit of actually delivering what we say in the business plan. And the two should adjust with each other depending on financial pressures and indeed any amendments that we make to the business plan in terms of objectives. And then strategy to grow through maximising delivery from available resources continues to be our underlying strategy. So continuing to look to maximise everything that we can do from the national park, from the resources we have, and then driving to maximise the amount of those that we have to deliver. And then just this graph, which I always try to put in, which I think is a really helpful one, just to kind of illustrate where we've been over the last sort of about 15 years now in terms of income generation, the resources that we do have, and that growing picture, which you can see, bar a couple of years of COVID, we have a trajectory which is an increasingly growing authority in terms of resources to be able to deliver. But again, always stating the fact that there is a limit to how much you can continue to grow whilst core grant remains the same and enables to deliver those kind of that real sort of base level to be able to leverage more external funding. So in terms of the growth strategy, from this slide's point of view, we have what I consider to be business as usual now. So looking for any sort of savings, efficiencies in what we do and how we can deliver, and then maximising the use of our existing resources. So looking at all of the kind of four main areas of income that we have and how we can deliver through those. And really, they're really inbuilt into teams and how they operate now as a normal way of working. The reality, actually, if we want to grow as an authority, there's only two real areas of income that we can actually generate growth. One is earned income, so that's all of our sort of car parks, retail, all those kind of areas of sort of commercial income. The reality of those is that there is space to increase earned income, there's opportunities to do so, but the amount to which that enables us to grow in terms of delivery is fairly limited. It helps to kind of maybe fund some of our corporate services to leverage more external funding, but it is limited. So that in reality, the real means to grow and deliver more is through delivery through externally funded projects from a financial point of view. Just positioning ourselves to be able to really maximise the amount of grants, external funding that we can bring in as an authority. And then there is a default. So if we fail to grow, there is a reality around managing decline. But at the moment, our strategy is very much focused on increasing our delivery and positioning ourselves to be able to do so. This slide just has a look at the earned income that's built within the MTFS at this point in time. So you can see the importance of car parks to us. It's worth mentioning that from an income point of view, this is really just sort of, I guess, turnover. Car parks are really the only one that actually generates us a margin that we're able to put into other things that we deliver and fund some of our other activities. All of the others really just help to make the net cost of those delivery less. The one to point out in terms of financial at 10% at the moment is mainly built up of interest. Interest rates are in our favour at the moment. Over time, they're likely to go down, and therefore that is likely to go down with it. So that's temporarily a good contribution to us, but over time, that's likely to reduce. So the key points here around maximising our assets. We have a number of assets in the balance sheet, really making sure that they work for us, things like car parks, etc., and having a lot of those kind of projects that we brought forward, such as NYMNPA, Rosebery, etc., to really look and invest and make sure that they work as best they can for us. New initiatives, so always looking at potential new initiatives to increase earned income opportunities. Making sure that we inflate fees, and that includes car parks. So we have a number of areas where we have agreements and things like that, making sure that we do increase those with inflation, and that includes our car park operations. And then just that commercial ethos and really trying to embed that in the organisation. On external funding, so on this graph here, you can see that in 24-25, we've got a considerable amount of external funding. The pipeline at 25-26 is a little low at the moment. Part of that is because farming and protected landscapes, we assume at the moment, stops in 25-26, which this year is about 1.3 million. But the pipeline, we still have a number of projects at the moment in the pipeline. So I think at the moment, the fact that we are pretty close to that target is a good position to be in. But you can see we have to constantly work on trying to make sure that we have that pipeline of delivery, and that really emphasises that. So the key points here, that project-driven culture. So in the organisation at the moment, we're really trying to embed that we work and deliver through projects as the real way of maximising the amount we can do for the park. Investing in a core that's built to resource that. So many of our externally funded projects won't fund things like finance, IT, HR, the volunteer supervisory team. A lot of those costs aren't included and can't be included. So we need to make sure that we have a core that can support that, because a lot of our functions are the same size as they were when we were a 9 million organisation, as opposed to a 14 million and even bigger. And there's a stretching point to which actually that becomes a limiting factor to how much we can do. And a risk of failure without the right approach, if we just try and bid and bid and bid and deliver more and more and more, we will probably break at some point, and we'll probably actually compromise the quality of what we can deliver. So we need to make sure, reputationally, it's essential that we continue to show ourselves to be a really first-class operator. So the more we do without building the structure, the more we put that at risk, and we need to be aware of that. So the only real option remaining to increase the output from the National Park is through this avenue, and therefore positioning ourselves as best we can as an authority to do that is essential. So this is the MTFS obviously has to have a lot of assumptions in it. There's a lot of unknowns, some very, very large and key ones. Pay is probably the biggest one. So at the moment, as an authority, we have a very large pay bill. It's probably our biggest element of all. But also, we never know what the pay award is going to be, quite often until we're well into the year, let alone before it. So at the moment, we've got an assumption of 3% in 25-26, returning to 2% thereafter. At the moment, we have no real eye to what the local government offer might be, but we have recently seen 2.8% given to other public sector organisations. So 3% here doesn't look out of line with what we're currently seeing coming out, but we're quite aware local government could be very different when that comes out, and we have to keep an eye to that. That represents a major risk to us, and certainly looking at 2% in the future, that's very much assuming what inflation will do in the future as well. So there's a key risk there. We've also got the national insurance change. So when we had the budget and we brought this to FRASC, we did mention that, but it was very hot off the press. We made that adjustment very late in the paper to increase the deficit by that, even though in the budget it did say there'd be some public sector support. We assumed in the FRASC paper that that wouldn't be the case, and that looks like quite an astute assumption. It looks probably like there won't be any support for that. So that for us requires us to find another £125,000 next year. Overhead inflation is assumed at 2%, so we've seen inflation coming down to just over the 2% mark. At the moment, it's hovering, going up a little bit. But that doesn't seem unreasonable at the moment, and I think when you look at last year's assumption, we were slightly higher than inflation over the course of the year. It came down a little faster than we thought. So overall, that feels reasonable at the moment. And then from a DEFRA funding point of view, we're still assuming flat cash throughout the 5 years in the paper, which is the main reason for the increase in deficit year on year. At the moment, from next year's point of view, flat cash looks like the most realistic option still on the table, but at the moment there's lots of discussions going on. We have no formal notification of what next year will look like yet. Earned income at 1.7 million. Last year that was 1.8 million. The reason for that going down at the moment is that the interest is dropping off a little bit with the rates of the Bank of England going down. And at the moment we don't have any car park tariff increases built into the MTFS. So that's one of our biggest ones that would increase earned income in terms of going up with inflation. We've got an external funding target of 2.5 million. That continues to be the target, although we want to be more aspirational, and we have beaten that target for the last 2 or 3 years now. But you'll have seen from the previous graph that the pipeline is just under that level, particularly with farming and protected landscapes dropping off. But you'll know we have large bids like More Connected in the pipeline, etc., which will obviously change that should that be successful. And then interest. So in the MTFS, we cap interest. At the moment, we're capping that at 2% on 5 million. So we capped it on 2% last year with a slightly higher cash value within that of 6 million. We are assuming that some of those reserves and things will be used over the course of the year, and therefore 5 million is more cautious. Any interest over and above that, it's because we don't build it in, because we don't want to build ourselves sustainably into the future on what is going to be a reducing income stream. Don't want to become too reliant on it, so anything over that will go to reserves. Property perspective, so at the moment, from a property point of view, there's nothing built in, there's a decision still to come. We will need to invest in property one way or another. So at the moment, the MTFS doesn't build in any assumptions for that. The decision for that and what we do will come later. A reference to large capital projects, one of our big risks, the more external funding we do and the more big capital projects that we do, the more there's an inherent risk that might fall to the authority. We always have to just be aware of that as we take on externally funded projects, and reserves helps to cater for some of that risk. And then core resource squeeze, I mentioned already, just making sure that we have the core resources to be able to deliver what we need to deliver. So from a financial position point of view, next year we're looking at £345,000 deficit. position, and then you can see year after year that grows with each year, and the most part of that is around DEFRA grant being assumed to be frozen versus inflation. That's the main reason for those movements thereafter. Now, you'll remember last year we set a balanced budget, so £345,000 for 25-26 is all extra growth in the budget, so I thought it would just be helpful just to kind of bring in a table, which is on the next one actually, so I'll just talk through these, sorry. So previous year budget assumptions, mostly accurate except for utilities. It's just worth mentioning about the assumptions we built in last year. Actually, most of those are okay, but utilities we overinflated. Actually, price didn't go up by as much. Deficit mainly because of that, plus the impact of NI. There's no generic savings built in, so we don't say, right, we will generically save X from here and put it in without any tangible target. So that deficit refers to what we know and what we actually have planned. And then in terms of the paper, so external funding is likely to grow in the detailed budget. So in the paper, you'll see there's an income and expenditure and that deficit. The total expenditure at the moment looks quite low in that paper, but we expect that to grow because at the moment it only contains sort of confirmed, fully confirmed external funding as opposed to the pipeline. And then the authorities continue to grow resources, therefore expenditure. MTFS indicates that that will stall. So we continue to grow, but that will stall if we don't get our core resources funded properly. And then finally, reserves. So reserves are all ring-fenced or earmarked at the moment. So funding deficits ongoing through reserves isn't a sustainable option. So just to use reserves to plug the gap rather than actually plan for it isn't a sustainable way to continue with the authority. And I think that's largely why we've put ourselves in a really good position at the moment, as we've always addressed the deficit issue. So this is the table, sorry, I was referring to before. So just to show that 345k movement and the real drivers behind that, we've got national insurance, which, as I've mentioned before, is 125k impact for us that we need to find. Pay inflation on sort of core funded posts. So with the external funding, section 106. Section 106 is inflation linked. External funding, we assume they will mitigate and pick up within projects. So this is really around DEFRA funded, those core posts impact. Interest, so that's 56k, where we've just seen that assumed fall in interest rates from the Bank of England reductions. Overhead inflation, so that's the 2% on overheads mentioned earlier. So vacancy factor. So one thing we have done is we introduced vacancy factor at 2% on core posts a couple of years ago now as a saving, because we were seeing that every year happening. So we built in for natural turnover of staff. We've actually seen very, very low turnover in core staff roles in the last 2 years, exceptionally low. So we're falling short every year, including this year on that. So we have adjusted that downwards a little bit because that saving is becoming unrealistic given the turnover that we're seeing. And then finally, there's a few other small elements as well. There's a small balance of movements in there. In terms of mitigating that deficit, so prior to FRASC, we'd talked as directors about mitigating that deficit. We'd come up with £330,000 worth of mitigation. We've had further conversations as well since then and come up with some potential options as well to increase that number. But all of that needs to come through in the detailed budget in February and March in terms of really detailing that out. But some of the key areas we've looked at is things like smarter procurement. There's quite a lot of areas at the moment where we might procure the same kind of things multiple times through a year, as opposed to the efficiencies of putting that into singular contracts. Utility savings I've mentioned already. I think we overstated a little bit the increase when we signed up a new contract, both in consumption and price. So we are seeing some utility savings that will flow through to next year. Planning and car parking fee increases are both part of that mitigation discussion. So increasing car parking tariffs for inflation is something that we should seriously consider. And planning fee increases. So planning fees are statutorily set, but we are looking potentially in legislation at that being a likely increase coming through government. So that's something that we're not in control of, but we're expecting will come. The timing of that and the extent of that is at the moment a little bit uncertain, but we do expect something to come through. Increased funding of core costs through external funding. So again, this year we've been particularly successful at that. So when we have a look at sort of Q2 numbers that we reported, Q3 numbers that we will be reporting in February, we've been particularly successful at being able to fund that through a number of avenues actually. Some of it is getting corporate costs into one or two of our external funding bids. We're starting to see that open up a little bit more now. But others using some of our expertise in a couple of our teams to actually sell that service to other people, provide that service at a cost which has helped to mitigate some of our core cost delivery. And then finally, a number of other saving proposals, such as reducing the costs of delivering things like Moore's Messenger and Out and About Guide, both looking at maybe frequency and advertising revenues. Postage and printing reductions. I think over time we're sending out less things, we're printing less stuff. That's all probably a good thing. And then vehicle and plant usage efficiencies as well. We replace our vehicles on a regular basis and our plants, but actually how we use that, are we duplicating vehicle usage? Could be more efficient around how we use those things, so we have to reduce less over that 10-year rolling programme. So that's some of the things we're looking at. So in conclusion, next year we've got 345k deficit to address. We'll be bringing the detailed proposals for that to the detailed budget papers in February and March. The driving factors, that freezing core grant versus paying overhead inflation, and then the impact of NI on top of that. So the main reasons for these increasing deficits remain the same, with that one-off national insurance hit being an additional one for 25-26. There is a mitigation plan. It needs more work in the detailed budget process. It is getting harder. The amount that we can divert funding to alternative sources, such as Section 106, really is now starting to become exhausted. And it's really looking at alternative options such as income generation and efficiencies, which are, as you can see from the detail we've brought, is more and more difficult all the time now. No certainty on pay awards core grant is making forward planning very challenging. At best, we get a one-year agreement in advance of the year. Quite often, we don't even know in advance. It's making any kind of financial planning really hard, not to just be reactionary at the last minute, as opposed to planning in advance. And the way to deliver growth and maximise outcomes for the National Park and grow overall resources is really through partnerships, building our reputation as an excellent partner and deliverer of projects, and being able then to position ourselves in terms of the way that we're built to be able to deliver more and more of that external funding, but making sure that we don't put ourselves at risk by going for too much and actually delivering poorly. And project delivery, that's the one that increases our leverage from core resources. We hear more and more from DEFRA now that what they like to see is that recognition that we use their grants to leverage more resources and more delivery. It's a really key point for them, and it's a really key point for us. And earned income growth, I mean, at best, that will help to support our core, so reduce that deficit each year in terms of replacing core grants, but it won't enable us to grow as an authority in terms of that huge delivery outside, but it will help support the actual core that we have. And then prioritisation of those use of core resources then becomes absolutely essential to making sure that we can deliver. And then not growing resources will mean that we manage to decline. It's not what we want to do. I think as members and officers, we've made clear our strategy is to grow. So we really just need to position ourselves and continue to put ourselves on the front foot around these deficits to make sure that we face them front on, we don't hide from them, and we look to mitigate them and continue to operate as efficiently as we can in order to be able to do that. And then just in terms of next steps, as mentioned already, the detailed budget proposals for 25-26 for the 1 year will come in February to FRASC, and then NPA in March for a final sign-off. And then the recommendation is for members to approve the MTFS.
Thank you, Pete. Very careful and thorough presentation. You say there's been no changes since FRASC?
The only minor change is just I've updated the inflation in the FRASC paper. That's in the latest inflation stats, because we've got 1 more month, and then a little bit of wording just around the latest DEFRA position around the grants, but no changes to the numbers.
Sure. Okay. Members, George.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Pete, for this presentation, and also for doing the same presentation when we had the meeting in FRASC. Every time I listen to it, I realize the scale of challenge that lies ahead and the difficulties that we are facing. And this is why I have 2 questions. The first one is from listening to the program yesterday about Country-File. I'm not sure if you have watched it. It seems that this is not an issue only affecting the North York Moors National Park Authority, but it is also affecting other national park authorities across the country. So within that theme, do we know if there is any measures that are being taken place at a national level, or are there any collaborative steps that we are carrying out with the other national parks on trying to find ways to deal with the long-term projected deficit? And then the other point, which is related also to the issue, is you talked about a few measures that could reduce the deficit over the coming years, Some of those are quite small. They might have an impact, but it's kind of tinkering with the big problem that is brewing for the future. There has to be some more radical, creative measures. Are we thinking outside the box about something that could actually deal with the issues that we have? Something maybe slightly more bold than some of the ideas that you have talked, because that could potentially provide a long-term solution to this issue. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll bring Tom in shortly around the
Tom
first
will do the
question.
national stuff. Yeah.
So I'll let Tom bring on the national stuff. On the other points, absolutely, it's common to national parks generally, without doubt. So we're not in a unique position here. I think all national parks are faced with the same issues. And you're right to draw attention to the fact that the mitigation here is really looking at 25-26 and trying to adjust for that. But there is a growing deficit over the years. At the moment, yes, we've got a few smaller initiatives that will help to mitigate next year on that short-term basis, but longer term, then yes, we absolutely need to look at bigger, more radical proposals. They may be structural, they may be looking at bigger ways of investing, potentially to bring in more earned income in a more sort of a more staged way, through potentially car parks and things of that sort. There's a number of larger initiatives and larger structural changes we may have to look at if that deficit position becomes true over the 5 years. So I think you're absolutely right to highlight that, yes, we've got some mitigation in this paper, which is about next year, but there is a longer term position which is much, much harder to mitigate. But based on a number of assumptions at the moment, we don't have a clear indication what some of those will look like. So it's yeah, I agree.
Thanks for this answer and for the reassurance that we will be looking at potentially some out-of-the-box creative thinking to try to deal with the structural issue. Is there a process that's taking place within the offices where they can brainstorm, thinking about other practices, looking at what other national parks, and maybe Tom will come to that in a second, what they are doing, some of those radical ideas that we can implement. And then in one of the slides, you talked about managed decline as a possibility. And I think given the comments that I mentioned earlier and given the conversations I've had with many members of the national park here, I do believe that the predominant view here is that we don't want to manage decline. We want success. We want to deliver for the residents and the visitors. So therefore, that's not an option for us. We want to find we want to explore every other possible avenue to try to get us to succeeding and thriving.
Completely agree. Yeah, I'll bring Tom in at this point to talk about that sort of bigger strategic picture.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, George. There's nothing more uplifting and inspiring for a workforce of an organisation knowing that your members want to go places in terms of developing and growing the authority, and I believe that passionately about our strategic direction. But there's no getting away from some of the challenges that Pete's laid out in the report. To your last point in the question about do we have the kind of the structural mechanisms within the organisation to kind of get that knowledge and inspiration, I think to an extent that we do. As a group of directors, we meet fairly frequently, probably 3 or 4 times a year, to actually kind of step away from the day job and actually look at how we can improve and where we can learn and be inspired by others. But we never have all the knowledge, so taking that learning and understanding from elsewhere is really important. Hence why I certainly put a lot of store by encouraging officers throughout the organisation to network with their colleagues and make sure that we're heavily involved in some of the national level working as well. And we'll talk about National Parks Partnerships a little bit later and the work that Bryony does as a board member of NPP, but that's quite important. The final mechanism we have is that a couple of years ago we started to convene a group of our heads of across the organisation to look at the project pipeline so that we're never short of ideas about long-term strategic projects across conservation, outdoor learning, public engagement, visitor attractions that mean that we can do things like More Connected and do them quite quickly because we're always thinking about where the next cab is on the rank that we can actually start to put in when we know that funding opportunities are available. And I think that's really important in that sense of being a more project-based organisation. In terms of the sort of coordinated effort across national parks, I mean, as Pete said, that there's a heavy dialogue taking place at the moment between chief executives and between finance officers about the financial position. We're not unique. If anything, the position is significantly more acute and more immediate in some of my counterparts. But I can only speak from the position of the North York Moors with any authority on all of this. What I can say is that there's an awful lot of activity taking place across the 10 English national parks, particularly led through National Parks England, around the business planning process within DEFRA at the moment to make sure our case within the department, having received its settlement from the Treasury, is really strong and really clear. Although we present this as a flat cash position that we're looking at, we can't exclude the possibility of cuts, and that would be absolutely devastating for all of us. And for many national parks, the fact that we don't think we'll receive the £500,000 uplift that we received last year represents a significant cut to their ability to deliver. And so there's coordinated activity at the moment to make sure that position is clear and understood, not just by officials but also by ministers. I know last week National Parks England met Mary Cray, who's the Parliamentary Undersecretary with responsibility for landscapes. We also had some opportunity to engage with Baroness Heyman, who is responsible for access, and also on Friday there were meetings with Steve Reed as well, Secretary of State. So there's already a direct level of conversation. As importantly though is thinking about the longer term, and that's where the process of influencing the next comprehensive spending review comes in. To my mind, it's important that we understand and explain the consequences of no increase in National Park Core Grant. But I also think it's really, really important that we remain relentlessly positive about the contribution that we can make to society and the delivery of public policy. And so you can't have one without the other. The potential for national parks to deliver more for government under its new missions, I think, is phenomenal. And we need to do a better job of articulating that story and why we justify the investment.
Thank you, Tom, for this answer. Just finally to add that we did also have the meeting back in the summer with members to discuss strategy, and I hope that will continue in future years, and we'll continue that dialogue with members on the strategic vision. Thank you.
Anybody else? Janet?
Thank you. Just for anybody listening, FRASC doesn't mean anything to people in the audience that might be here. I'm not a member of that committee, and I'm very grateful to the Chair and Vice Chairman of FRASC who do such a good job with us, but just a point that people might not know what we're talking about. Pete, I wonder if you could help me. One comment is, I think it could be viewed as a good thing that the vacancy target hasn't been met, because that means staff might be very happy in their employ and doing a wonderful job, which is a positive. The second thing, please could you help me with and clarify, you said that whichever decision we make about property, there will be a cost, but it isn't dealt with in this paper. So could you just explain how that is dealt with, so that we understand any of the other is there a relationship between that? Is it through reserves? That's a little bit that I don't understand, so I'd be grateful if you could help me how we're going to treat whatever it is, because you've said something will happen. So how's that amount being dealt with, please? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, and absolutely right around acronyms, by the way. We should never put them in papers or in speech. So yes, FRASC is Audit Committee, for Finance Risk and Audit Committee for those listening, standards. In terms of that question around property, there is a decision to come with a full business case, etc., which will have the financial implications in there. At the moment, until that comes, the full financial implications of our decision and what might play in is unknown until that paper is decided by members. So at this stage, I think there's nothing built in for that. I think the financial implications of that are, because there's two options there, as we know, there's either stay or go to a new property. Both of them have financial implications because it's an investment to be made either way. There's likely to be some degree of borrowing required, but that might come to reserves as well, which will help fund some of that. So there's an element of borrowing. We'll be able to do it from cash, but that still would be an MRP charge in the early years of that. But equally, some of those, there might be savings around some of the options as well. So I think it's really about what that end paper will say in terms of those options, what members decide, and then playing that in. In terms of 25-26, I think it'll be very limited in terms of the of that happening, because in 25-26 you don't need to take an MRP charge in your first year. So it's likely to be from 26-27 when the implications of that will kick in financially. So we have a little bit more lead time in terms of the financial implications of that from next year, which is obviously immediate concern for trying to mitigate next year's deficit. So at the moment, the paper notes that decisions to come. The financial decision implications of that will be in that paper for members to decide. And then when that decision is taken, we'll build those in, and the impacts of that will be from 26-27.
Christine.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the thorough paper and presentation, Pete. That's great. One question that seems to circle in my mind, and I don't think we've had it through FRASC or this committee, but hopefully you'll be working on, is that essentially, whilst I'm keen, as George and others are, to embrace the opportunity and the optimism, we also have a responsibility, of course, to plan for all eventualities. And you highlight that the biggest expenditure of the park basically is the staff pay. So I wonder if at some point in future we could have assurance, and hopefully these figures do exist, but that we have some figures around exactly how that breaks down and our flexibility there, and how we could shift that based on various risks that we might face going forward. Something around permanent versus fixed term, how that relates to the project contracts that we have, etc. Yeah, would welcome that at some point in future. Thank you.
No problem at all. I can bring something when we do the detailed budget for FRASC in February, March. I can put something in specifically around that subject.
Thanks. So this is the strategy, and then we're going to get the details when we come to the budget proposal. So we needn't panic too much yet about the detail, but setting the strategy is important. Malcolm.
Yeah, thanks, B. That was really good presentation. Very clear. I'm quite concerned. We've got huge amounts of uncertainty around, I must admit. But as Tom said, I mean, I think the important point is that from DEFRA's point of view, we've got to make it very, very clear, as we are doing, working with our national park partners, that because they've kept our grant constant for, is it 6 years now? Something like that. It's really important that that grant is used. You said yourself that they're asking us, how much are we doing more with the grant that we get? Well, over the last 6 years, we've shown very clearly that we can do a great deal, but that they can't keep cutting the grant and expecting us to increase the amount that we're generating from it. There's a limit to this. And so we need to get that point across very clearly. We also need to get across the point to government that we are, again, we're here to help them. We can help them deliver, but we need a sufficient core grant to enable us to generate the additional resources that we're clearly capable of doing in order to deliver what they want. And if we can get those points across, then perhaps they won't continue to cut our grant.
I think all really good points that play into that positive narrative that Tom was referring to as well. That we need to continue to show and demonstrate, not just say what we can do, but also demonstrate it. And I think we've clearly demonstrated actually just how innovative we can be over a number of years to increase our resources. Some brilliant projects we're delivering and have delivered. And we really need to beat the drum for that, and actually how that plays into government policy, absolutely, and say to DEFRA what we can do for them, as opposed to just assuming that they'll give us the money, just say what we can do for that, and leveraging that grant to deliver 14 million of activity is absolutely the way to go, and continue to have a positive growth element to that. But absolutely, core grant's essential, and it's getting that across that core grant doesn't fund directly the external funded projects now. External funding does that, but it's absolutely essential to be able to deliver those projects and to grow and do more for government. It's really getting that message across is really important. In terms of long-term planning, as I mentioned before, only knowing what DEFRA grant is going to be for 1 year. For the last few years, we've had 1 year agreements. Is really difficult for planning. George made the point earlier about the need to plan into the future and those kind of more radical to address the future deficits. But whilst you don't know what's happening beyond 1 year in DEFRA grants, it makes some of that quite difficult. we absolutely need to plan those steps. But if we knew where we were going to be through the next CSR for the next 3-4 years, we could really start to plan that out much better in a much more sustainable way. So I completely agree, Malcolm. Those uncertainties really don't help, but absolutely beating the positive drum of what we can do is the way to make it clear to government about just how much national parks can deliver for the national priorities and national picture.
Well, I think you set out very clearly the challenges that we're facing even for the next year. So thanks.
Yes, I think Malcolm is right about they can't expect us to do more with the limited resources, and I think Pete touched on the answer briefly by saying that we should highlight what we can offer. And I think a big part of the puzzle is the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act and the new responsibility on relevant authorities in furthering the purposes of national parks and what comes with that. And of course, in return, there is the additional responsibilities that national parks have to deliver to achieve, to contribute to the goals of national government. But I think we're going to discuss it later. But that's a piece of the puzzle which hopefully will square the circle or circle the square, whatever it was. Yeah.
Okay. Again, it's been a good debate, really important. Just a couple of questions, comments really, because it's not unusual for us to be in this position at this time, forgive me, and I think the reason that we're staring at the difficulty is how we get it fixed, as Pete said. But nonetheless, our grant stays the same, and our employment costs have gone up by 250,000, haven't they? Which I don't begrudge the staff that increase, but there's an extra 125 national insurance to find in that, and that makes quite a big cut in our grant of only 4.3 million, doesn't it? That said, you look at the overall picture, and if government invests £1 in a national park in the North York Moors, at least, it gets £3 spent, and so that can't be bad value, can it? And I think that the problem with project funding, brilliant as it is, as you said, is it's difficult to give the staff and the people surety, and building the staff costs into the projects means that they're inevitably on short-term contracts. I know Malcolm and I and a couple of others went to the staff meeting the other day, and it was great to see what a diverse but completely committed bunch they are. It's a dangerous place for a chair or a member to go, but I got away without any serious reprimand this time. But great to see our staff so committed, and that was obvious to see. So, but all in all, yes, we have the challenges. In practice, we keep kicking out the goods, and so we need to talk about those stories. I thought I saw the little bit that Tom did for the country file the other day and circulated to members, and I thought that's exactly the messages that we need to do. Look at the difference we can make as a national park authority. The big opportunities are the Levelling Up bill. I'm getting more buy-in from our partners. That's a no-brainer, isn't it? Tom mentioned elms and countryside stewardship and land management grants, which is a massive investment into the national park, and that's an opportunity to get that investment, not to take a cut out of it, but just to make sure that the objectives are focused towards our national park purposes. That would make a massive difference on the ground. And then, of course, health and well-being. No one's going to, I don't think, rush and pay us out of the NHS budget for health and well-being, but continually we deliver a huge uplift to the public in mental and physical health, well-being, and we need to keep talking about that, because there's no question that does help spread the load of or the burden, should I say, on more practical health solutions, but it's difficult to find the money for it, isn't it? It's definitely a value that national parks are giving, and something I think they're really proud of. So after that little rant, I'm going to move on to the recommendation before I ignite any more debate, because we've got quite a long agenda. So the recommendation is, oh gosh, I lost it again. Right, 98, on my page 98. That members approve the medium-term financial strategy. Happy to do that? Brilliant. Thank you. So, moving on then, it is, how will we do it? We'll do one more item and then we might have a quick comfort break. It is on the audit business. Yeah, so that's the authority. I've got my glasses, that's not right. The authority business plan priorities for 25-26 and progress against the milestones for 24-25. Back to Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Me again. So the last report I presented to this committee was about the management plan, which is the plan for the whole national park. This is about the business plan, which is the plan for this authority. So this is the 6-month progress report. So we report to this committee twice a year on how we're getting along in terms of our business plan. The report before you basically does two things. It reports forward to next year in terms of what directors think the priorities are for next year, and it reports backwards on how we've been getting along in the first 6 months of the business plan for this financial year. So I'll start with priorities for next year. This, as officers, is what we think the priorities are for next year. So directors have contributed to this paper and set out those priorities for next year. They're not a million miles away from last year. And again, Tom might want to comment, or others. But it's landscape scale, nature recovery, climate change, health and well-being is a big part of it. Lots of things happening on the coast-to-coast route, hopefully next year. And rights away, kicking off local plan review, which is me, for next year. And then obviously carrying on with the property review and the new finance system, which Peter's working on, which is probably going to make quite a big difference to how we work centrally. So those are set out in your paper. So that's looking forwards. Looking backwards, there was a report setting out how we're getting along in terms of our milestones. So we set our milestones in April each year, and those milestones basically explain what we hope to achieve next for the forthcoming year. They keep getting more and more milestones as we've gone through the years, but we've got 93 for this year. And we self-mark ourselves against those milestones, basically. And 52, we think we're on course. So 66% of those milestones, we think we've either already achieved or we're getting along fine with them. And I think that's probably slightly better than last year. We're 2 years in, well, 2.5 years into the business plan now. So generally quite positive news. In terms of those milestones, they're not a million miles away from what I was reporting as the management plan. So obviously we have a big contribution to that delivery of that management plan. I'll just highlight a few areas where I think we're probably slightly behind. I mentioned earlier on about woodland creation. We're doing not too bad as an authority, but we are still slightly behind target. We're slightly behind on our nature recovery plan, Bransdell and Levisham plans as well. We're slightly behind on our volunteering strategy. Again, not quite as far ahead as we thought we'd be on Gisborne Forest schemes. And cycleway signage, we already discussed affordable housing earlier on. Again, we're behind on that. And the design code, again, slipped slightly on that. Those last two are my responsibility. So hopefully get those back on track next year. Which part I'll open it up to any questions.
Well, it seems to be the theme of the items we've got. Questions? I think we've burnt ourselves out on the business strategy. Malcolm. Yeah.
No, thanks. I mean, that list seemed, as you were talking, Paul, I was thinking that the basic question is that the main sorts of areas that we think the staff ought to be doing in the next year? As you say, that there's things like, local plan, all that sort of thing, which clearly more resources will be needed next year than have in the past because of the work that we're doing. So I think that list looks, I mean, I can see why all of those items are on the list because there's fairly important things that we must be doing next year. So yeah, it seems very sensible to me.
Is it Janet and then Heather?
I did. I refused to be considered as being burnt out, Chairman. I think that the point is, though, that we've had the opportunity. There's such a close relationship with the previous report. I think we've had the opportunity to ask the questions that we need to ask and have had an understanding. And this is so. I feel that I've already been able to ask the things that are of interest that are going to take us into more scrutiny in the future years. So, thank you for the opportunity for my clarity, Chairman.
I'm pleased to acknowledge that. We'll say pausing for breath, I think, would be a better way to describe it. Heather.
Yes, thanks for that. Obviously, for members that weren't at the members' update, I was quite interested to hear about the new finance system. Which efficiencies and I think it's called Access. From what is that? Access. I think I had some past history with it, the same sort of system, and I'm delighted it'll make things easy and transparent. And that again, I didn't want to fetch it up during the savings thing. I was thinking it could actually release time for officers or people to do other jobs as well, because it's, from what I'm understanding, the system in it's from start to finish. You put the information in and it goes all the way through. So you're not duplicating what you do. It stops getting, everything goes on. I know, it's not, you won't actually see any of these bits of paper. It's all there and it's transferred through, again, for procurements and all the things we do. I think that will make us really great. And as I say, it goes towards, the probably great saving. I'm not suggesting anything about redundancy, anything like that, but it will create opportunities for staff to be able to possibly do. I mean, that's probably more on Pete's side, that. But just very briefly, as I said, that's exciting to me. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. I know the couple of conversations Tom and I have had with our new local MPs have been very keen on health and well-being and also education. I don't know. We do work on education still, maybe not as much as we could do, but is that folded into one of those objectives?
I'll perhaps pick that up and invite Joel to add any further clarification. But I think the challenge over the last few years has been how we deliver education and outdoor learning, as we tend to refer to it, as opposed to whether we do it or not. We continue to feel it's important to inspire the next generation. We're certainly taking a much more targeted approach, primarily through projects like Generation Green 2, towards underserved and deprived communities on the periphery of the national park, consistent again with our strategy and focusing on the fact that you tend to have a confluence of issues related to not just aspiration, but also health and well-being that link into those communities as well. The challenge again going forward comes back to that question around resource. Traditionally, our outdoor learning has been funded primarily through core grant. A couple of years ago, we started to move towards the direction of delivering more and more through external funding activity. There's a big outdoor learning and health and wellbeing element that's within the more connected bid, which will allow us to theoretically do more. But it will always be that challenge of how do we ensure that we deliver more through making optimum use of the core resources that we've got. And the only way of doing that, as Pete explained in the previous presentation, is by making sure it becomes part of external funding.
Thanks for that. Because certainly I look forward to that, because I think we've identified some great outcomes and some great focuses with health and well-being, as well as just the general fact of being out amongst nature and enjoying yourself. But in the back of my mind, I was sort of wondering whether outdoor learning and basically learning does have a health and well-being uplift, and I think it does. I think we just need to make sure that we understand how to count that. Do you want to add something to that, Joel?
It's just to give some reassurance that we're considering education within that widest concept of it. So rather than just focusing on the curriculum or working with formal education providers, which is the traditional route we've often thought about it, but very much building that concept of engagement and across a range of different audiences. And as we'll hear later around some of the work that's happening in respect of engaging with audiences that struggle otherwise to feel like they're part of a national park. Working in this way is going to be critical. The other key thing that we've done is we've made a small restructure within that area to bring the health and well-being elements together, in particular with what was outdoor learning and also arts and culture, which, as members are aware, we've just launched a new partnership. And the idea being that all of those will be linked together around engagement. And the things that will turbocharge that will be the external funding opportunities, like More Connected. So that idea already, we're starting to bring them together rather than treat them as silos. And I think that's really important for a way of integrating things in the way forward.
Thanks, Joe. I like that turbocharging our health and well-being output. I like that. Any more from members? So, okay, that's the recommendation. My iPad page numbers are gone wrong. Page 101.
Next one, next page. That's it.
Oh, we go, yeah. Sorry. So, the recommendation is that members note the contents of this report and offer any comments. So, I think we've done that. Yeah. Shall we just have a 5-minute comfort break? Yeah. It might be 7 minutes, but we'll just adjourn for Okay, members, we'll reconvene the meeting. So on to item 10, which is National Parks Partnerships. Bryony.
Thank you, Chair. So you'll see from the paper this this item is just basically updating members on the work that we've been doing with National Parks Partnership, how it's supported and contributed our work here at the North Moors. So hopefully you'll all know that National Parks Partnership is a limited liability partnership that supports all 15 of the UK national parks. And it was originally set up to support the delivery of corporate partnerships and other sort of fundraising and sponsorship opportunities for national parks. There is an associated National Parks Foundation charity that sits alongside it, although not all parks are a part of that foundation. We're not part of that foundation. But the partnership acts as a sort of collective, really, to bring together opportunities for finance, particularly from private finance, more and more so than sponsorship, as has been in the past, to support national parks and delivery of national parks purposes. So we pay an annual membership fee of £10,000 a year, and I sit on the board of the partnership along with 3 other national park officers. The other members of the board are mainly sort of from private industry, a lot of sort of marketing expertise and that sort of thing. And there is representation from each of the host countries on that board. The financial support mainly funds a small core team of people, although there is some DEFRA funded project work going on as well, which is being funded separately. So over the last couple of years, we've benefited significantly from our partnership, taken advantage of lots of opportunities that have been presented to help National Parks Partnership support us in securing private finance in particular. So we've got a table in the paper that explains the sorts of money that we've had and for what sort of projects as well. So a lot of conservation projects, but we did have a significant contribution from BMW last year for the Recharge in Nature project, which Joel's team led on. And I think I mentioned earlier as well that we were successful in some additional private finance funding for the next 2 years as well. So over the last 2 years, we've brought in nearly £200,000 from that partnership. But I think just as importantly as the financial contribution, I think the support that we get for sort of intellectual information as well, which has helped us position ourselves so that we're ready to receive private finance contributions when they're proposed, enabled us to support the development of projects that will be appealing to private financiers, I think has been just as important as the actual financial contribution itself. So we last brought a paper to NPA, I think in 2021, which authorised the continuing membership of NPP for the next 3 years. So, which is why we've brought paper to you again to get that permission to continue. Obviously, the recommendation asks that we continue that support, but also that we, delegate the contribution, delegate the decision to make the contribution to the National Park officers, unless there's a sort of material change in the arrangement that we have with NPP or with our own financial situation that means that we might want to bring it back to members again. So it's quite simple paper, simple proposal, and very happy to answer any questions about our work with NPP if anyone has any.
Thanks, Bernard. I'll go to Michelle first and then George.
First, thanks for the report, Brian. And I think my questions are going to stem around private finance. Just a couple of questions around that, because I noticed when we were discussing earlier about core grant, etc., one of the things I was thinking of the previous government, and I'm sure this government's going to continue, will say you've got access to private finance in a way that no other publicly funded body has in this country. And I suppose the question I would ask is, firstly, how far do we think this will go in terms of future years, in terms of income? And probably more importantly, how do we manage this in an ethical manner? Because corporations can go, and I'm not talking about anybody that's in the report here, but you can go from being very reputable to an issue occurring in the media very quickly overnight, and we would have, say, a named brand that had funded. How does the NPP intend to manage that, or something like that to happen? Because clearly there's an opportunity here. Clearly there are certain corporations that will want to do this, but clearly there's other organisations who might, shall we say, see it as an opportunity to enhance their brand, but not necessarily be particularly interested in this work, but it looks good on paper. And at some point, somebody else then is going to start investigating how effective are these schemes because of corporate organisations involved. So how do we intend to manage that going forward?
Thanks, Michelle. Both fantastically interesting and appropriate questions as well. So for NPP, there is an ethics charter. There's a lot of work done between the offer of a private finance partnership and the delivery of a private finance partnership to understand, the sorts of activities that each organisation is involved in. There are some immediate sort of red flags, for want of a better phrase. So we don't have any partnerships with any fossil fuel companies, for example, but there is a significant sort of pro forma that we work through to understand, both, how those organisations work with their own workforce, with their supply chains. I mean, it's not infallible, obviously. We can't know everything, but there's quite an intensive and diligent process that's undertaken before we get to the point where we actually have a partnership agreed. So I think that ethics charter is quite effective, and there've been plenty of organisations that have approached us that we've said no to as NPP. And again, we can also have partnerships recommended to us that we might think actually locally that's not relevant to, that's not appropriate because there might be some particular local issues. So again, even though NPP have gone through their own ethics charter and made a decision that from the NPP's perspective it's an ethical choice, if we feel that that's not right for us, we don't have to partner with that organisation if we don't want to. I think the thing about the longer term opportunities is it's still very early days in the realms of private finance. We already know from a lot of the intellectual work that we've done through NPP and other projects that we are not an immediate solution for example, the sort of carbon market investments that are on offer. So most of the opportunities that are coming to us are through sort of ESG, so the sort of environmental, social and governance side, the sort of voluntary support, if you like. And they're relatively small scale as well. But we've got a good pipeline of projects and we've got lots of interest in those projects. So certainly in the sort of short to medium term, we're seeing this as an opportunity to explore what that private finance can offer to us. One of the things we want to be really careful of is that we're not the sort of mission creep, really, that we're not chasing the money and that the money is genuinely delivering our national park purposes and our management plan priorities. So, and one of the things that we're finding with the partners that have invested so far is that they want to sort of try us out and maybe put a little bit of money in to start with, and then if that works successfully, then there might be a longer ongoing relationship. So I think it's early days. We have had some investment that's been positive and that's been able to help us achieve more of our objectives, and hopefully in the future that will increase.
Before I go to George, I just think that really good questions, Michelle. And I have to admit, but back when NPP was started, there was sort of a Scotsman, an Englishman, and a Welshman. I was the Englishman in that beginning, and I think that the journey of ethics was there back then, and I think maybe there was some naivety in imagining that a collective or charitable body would just get donations from well-meaning people. You know, it was never going to work like that, and it didn't work like that. When you're looking for business donations, businesses need to make sure that they get value for the money that they donate, and that's all associated to me with our brand, isn't it? It's the value of a national park brand, which is going to encourage people to want to be seen to invest in it, and so there is an issue connected this to our UK work with NBP, which is our UK communications, and that's it's complex and ongoing, but definitely building the brand is a really important part of that. But I think the other thing, when we set NPP up those years ago, we were in the same position that we are now, challenged with a spending review, with having to prove our worth, with having to show that we left no stone unturned to get private finance and be as efficient as we could. And NPP did that then, and it's still doing that now. That, you know, if anyone says, "Are you looking for private finance partnership working?" We are, and so you know, I'm pleased with that too. But it is definitely. It may not be huge benefits, but it's delivering benefits and it's delivering collective working. So, but we had some difficult decisions and difficult conversations at the start. I really mustn't maudle on that, George.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Bryony, for this. I mean, you mentioned value for money. If you and the officers believe that this is good value for money, I have no problem at all in supporting this initiative, and I would be voting in favour of it, because there is work to be done with other national parks, and it is helpful. You've obviously in the report put a caveat that until officers change position, which is also very reassuring, because it means that you are keeping an eye on the situation as it evolves, and if at any point it's not necessary to spend this amount of money because we are not getting value for money, then obviously you bring a recommendation so that we stop it. So there is nothing set in stone. It could always be reviewed. And I was also checking the membership of the board, and I believe that out of the English national parks, there are only 2 organizations represented there, and we are one of them. So that's obviously a positive thing, because it means that we are able to have our voice heard clearly there, obviously as a representative of the national park family, but an insight from the North York Fawn.
Thanks, George. Malcolm?
Yeah, I mean, look at it simply from our point of view. We get a fair chunk of money in for the investment that we make in this company, in this charity, so they're doing well. So I'm very happy with what's been proposed. All I would ask is that it's useful just getting a report like this once a year, and if you can continue doing that. But happy with the recommendation.
Yeah, that's not a problem. Thanks, Malcolm.
Sure. I endorse that. If it's something that members have approved, it would be good for members to have a bit of an update. Either if something important happens, or otherwise just maybe annually to tell us nothing important has happened, one or the other. But I think if it's come to us now, that would be a good thing to do. Members happy with the recommendations, which are, note the contents of the report, ask any questions, support the ongoing membership of NPP, and approve the authority's annual membership contribution. Happy with that?
Brilliant. Yes.
Brilliant. Thanks, Bernie. So, on to the Chief Executive's report, page 120. Yeah, anything to add?
Yeah, that's over to me. So I think I'll draw out 2 items and take the rest of the report as read and answer any questions from members. So the first, you'll see under 2.2 that I drew attention to the annual Park Protector Awards that were held in London last week. I wasn't able to attend myself in person, but a number of we had 3 entries in the awards, and a number of those representatives were able to attend. I know they had a fantastic afternoon. We didn't win any awards, I'm afraid to say, in spite of having 3 entries. they did a brilliant job in advocating for the national park. I know we met 3 of our local MPs during the event who turned out to support the event, which was great to see as well. And I'm just really proud of the team right the way across the organisation for those nominations that we received. I think the second thing I'll draw out relates to the discussion that we had earlier about the 75th anniversary of the national parks and access to the Countryside Act. So it was unclear at the time that I was writing the report whether that might amount to anything by way of a stage-managed opportunity for the government to say something positive about national parks, national landscapes, and national trails. I've been gradually checking my phone as the morning's gone on just to see whether the email alerts come through. I'm afraid it hasn't yet, although I am still expecting something to come forward from DEFRA ministers through the course of today. We did have a briefing with officials on Friday that gave some insight into what government might be saying today, which I'm reasonably confident enough in referring to in this section, which is we are expecting to see publication of the non-statutory guidance relating to how relevant authorities should deal with the requirements under the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, which are now extant to seek to further the purposes of national parks and similar for national landscapes. Secondly, an intention to come forward with implementing legislation pursuant to the Act to strengthen the relationship between management plans and statutory targets under the Environment Act, and to strengthen the relationship between the contribution, development and delivery of management plans and the role of relevant authorities in it, which goes back to George's point earlier about the importance of those provisions within the Act that really strengthen the contribution that relevant authorities can make. And alongside the Environment Act of 2021 and the Protected Landscapes and Targets and Outcomes framework, I think it gives a real bite to management plans. So that's something that we particularly welcome. It's something that we've campaigned for as national park authorities for a long time, and we were really keen to see those provisions in the Act. So hopefully ministers will express their intention to come forward with that commitment. Finally, I am expecting government to say something around governance and an intention to reform governance. It feels a bit like deja vu for those of you around during the Glover review. I don't think it's ever really gone away. Quite what that amounts to at this stage, frankly, I don't know. When I do, I'll brief you a little bit further. I think, though, all of this is against the backdrop of the funding conversation that we had earlier, and I think certainly the reaction from National Parks England and from national park authorities generally is will be to say it's great that we're seeing new provisions come forward through Laura, but without the kind of powers, tools, and in particular financial resources to deliver it, it's a very, very challenging position and situation for national park authorities to be in, and I'd certainly expect there to be some quite muted reaction from my colleagues. Happy to take the rest of the report as read, Chair.
Thanks, Tom. I know we let George steal your thunder a little bit there, but
You did a better job than I could.
I don't think that's true. But good to reiterate.
I disagree.
Colin.
I see at 3.2 we have the cash of sum offered from the North Yorkshire Council towards footpath upkeep. Is that a big increase, a small, or how much were we getting before? To be fair, that's one thing I didn't know. Thank you.
No, I'm glad you've raised the question, Colin. So I mean, it's a big increase in the sense that we haven't received a financial contribution since 2012, or at least a regular financial contribution. So it's really welcome news that North Yorkshire Council have been prepared to make that offer, and make that offer for 5 years as well, which is really positive. We've held some discussions amongst officers. We've held some discussions with colleagues in the Yorkshire Dales. It's an offer for both for each national park, and with the Recreation and Wellbeing Forum, who met recently to discuss this. I think, although there are a couple of parts of the existing delegation agreement, we'd welcome a little bit of technical conversation on there. We don't consider those to be of of any serious magnitude. They're just minor points of clarification that we think it's important to update in the context of an agreement that's been extant since 2016. But otherwise, as officers, we're minded to accept that offer from North Yorkshire Council with gratitude.
Janet?
Thank you. It's 2.4. It's the consultation that you made us aware of, Tom, about proxy voting and other things, and that the NPA is going to make a response. Can I just check, when does it close? Because I started it and then didn't complete it because I had some concerns about the proxy voting for planning and whether or not there was a differentiation. Because for my mind, there has to be a differentiation between you can't sub at a planning committee, and also you'd want to know that somebody was taking a decision in their own right without, there doesn't need to be any pressure on anybody. So I had some different thoughts about a planning committee, and it didn't appear to me that that was differentiated in that consultation. So it's just to confirm. I hope I haven't missed the deadline because I do want to contribute to that, but I was anxious that we knew exactly what we've been asked to comment on. Thank you.
Yeah, you haven't missed the deadline, but it is imminent. I think it's either on Wednesday or Thursday this week, 18th or 19th. I remember looking at the consultation last week, as I've not submitted the NPA's responses yet. So you've got a couple of days to do that. I think you may raise an important point, Janet.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know. I haven't seen our response, but I think it'd be worth officers just thinking about the impact. I think remote attendance is great. Proxy may have some issues. Good point. Anybody else? Malcolm.
It's just to pick up your comment about governance, Tom. I really don't look forward to going through all the other discussions that we had yet again, and I presume, although we don't know, I presume they're the sorts of things that will be emerging, but such is life.
Yeah, I mean, at this stage, I don't know, so I'd have to caveat whatever I say. But I think there are two things that were, I guess, part of the discussion around the time of the landscapes review, and certainly have been reported back in conversations that officials have had with ministers in early days around National Park Authority governance, and they're around the size of boards. I mean, I remember a previous minister saying that we're at the saner end of the spectrum in having 20 members, but some authorities have in excess of 30, which is significant. And the second is around diversity as well, and making sure that our governance reflects the diversity of the nation as we see it now, as opposed to how it might be perceived by some audiences. And I think those are the two issues that probably would be tackled or attempted to be tackled.
And I could add that. That's myself, and I think Tom as well, in the National Arts family, are not pushing a further review of governance just because the amount of effort and time in DEFRA interface that, in my view, I don't say was wasted, but was used with, to be honest, very little result. And I think governance is important. I don't think that the general member of the public cares too much about what we do in our board. They just want us to make good value decisions with their money and deliver stuff for them. And so, to me, our focus on DEFRA, as Tom says, needs to be positive about the value for money that we can deliver. I really wouldn't want to be talking about internal governance because I don't believe that's good value for the public, even though it has its challenges. I think if DEFRA said, can you fix your board diversity and get the correct number, we easily can. The problem is when they get public appointments and heavens knows what into it, as we saw with Glover. So I have to say, I think both Tom and I are dragged into that rather than going willingly. The things that the National Park can deliver value for the public are the levelling up bill, the duty of others, making sure that elms, FIPL, land management support is in tune with our national park purposes, and access to health and well-being. that's where we can make a real difference. That's what I'd be saying to DEFRA if I get the chance. I don't know what Tom says, but I think it's the same.
I'm not going to contradict you.
Okay. Any more for Tom's report? No, thank you. So we're on then to reports from the National Parks Conference. I think Jill's going to give us a start on this, and it'd be good to have a few comments from the people who attended.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So this is an opportunity for us just to report back to National Park Authority, those of us that were able to attend the conference, which takes place every 2 years with all the collective body of the UK national parks. And this year it was hosted by Northumberland, and we were based in Newcastle. And as we've heard a lot already today about the 75th anniversary of the legislation, in particular, the theme that was picked out was focusing in on the kind of origins of that legislation around some of the mass trespass and the idea that landscapes were for everyone. And that was the theme of the conference. As I'm told and informed, as this was my first conference, the blend of discussions, keynote speakers, but also opportunities to network, but also to visit the range of special qualities that a national park has to offer is part of that real mix, and certainly the value of everybody being able to come together and share common challenges and discuss things is really important. So just to highlight some of the things that were picked up on, that focus on the fact that back in 1949, our society, our world was very different in terms of how it was made up. And the important theme that quite a few of the speakers really wanted to point out was that the ends which led to the founding of the national parks as a movement and then in the legislation haven't changed, but the means by which we connect and our diversity as a nation has changed considerably since 1949. And really what they wanted to do through the means of variety of speakers was to explore what that means for us now in the 2020s and looking forward. And I think it was fair to say that some of the presentations were challenging. It was uncomfortable at times. And I think that's a really good thing, a positive thing, because you have to really then think and reflect. And also it stimulates discussion and debate. And as part of that, there were times when people in the room really did challenge us. And you've heard an example about that around governance, for example. And that's one that often gets cited, but in other ways as well, in terms of how are we thinking? And our ability to place ourselves in the shoes of others that do not necessarily feel like these are landscapes where they are included. That was one of the themes that they really wanted to pick up. So we had a good discussion and being able to really look through that. But as I mentioned, there were opportunities really to explore as part of this, and a variety of opportunities were presented on the middle day for us to get out into Northumberland. I think the chair there was trying to claim a piece of Northumberland for the North York Moors as part of one visit, which was looking very much at access and services in a very remote community. And I think the one of the other ones there is a visit to various local enterprises. There were quite a few that were brought to our attention, both within the conference venue but also visiting it. So quite a few seem to involve local alcoholic products, which I'm sure was designed with a certain audience in mind, and it was very well received, but it was all very much above board. The other things that took place, yes, the other things that took place as well, which I think were important, was that outside of the actual conference plenary sessions, there were a variety of stands and stalls, and in particular there was one that was led by the youth voice effectively across the national parks and the young people coming together, and they were very much welcome to the conference. And we took one of our own youth voice members on the right there, Amber Hughes, who's one of our maintenance rangers, And that importance of young people's presence in a gathering which traditionally otherwise will skew towards older people was really refreshing, and they made a really significant contribution as part of that. And also we had an opportunity to undertake an urban safari within Newcastle and Gateshead as part of one of the evenings, where we ended up at, I think it's now called the Glass House. I was still thinking of it as the Sage, but we had a really inspiring talk with the artist that created the Lost Spells series. I don't know if anybody's seen the exhibition that took place. It was at Danby Lodge, the Inspired by Gallery, a couple of years ago, and it was absolutely amazing to watch her paint live using some technology and things like that, which really do underpin the value of just coming together and being able to focus particular things. In terms of on the outputs from this, and this infographic really picks up quite a lot of the themes that we heard about, and I think for me, the importance of this was always about, this is an opportunity for us to start thinking again about some issues. So rather than get into a debate, and I think it was as Malcolm said, we don't want to necessarily go over old discussions that have happened again and again, and some of them have been around for a while, like the issue around boards, for example. But it was really getting under the skin of thinking about what should the future look like in terms of how do we connect people and nature together. And the phrase I really liked that came through is this idea that in nature we have biodiversity, and that's part of the ecosystem that actually strengthens how nature operates. And we have to think of diversity in the same way in terms of human diversity as being a real strong element. And therefore, who's missing, who's not there, who doesn't feel like they are able to occupy spaces within our national parks comfortably, and that idea of then moving towards ways in which landscapes for everyone, where people feel like they belong. One key output from the conference was some work that has been done by National Parks England and the Soil Collective, and I'll talk a little bit later under the EDI report around that. But that's one of the ways in which we can take forward some of the thinking that was unlocked by the conference. So I'll stop there, Chair. Hopefully other members who attended will have some thoughts and views of their own.
Thanks, Joe. Malcolm?
Yeah, thanks. Good summary there, Joel. I think covering everything. I think when you mentioned that some of the talks initially were challenging, you didn't quite get across the impression that some of us who were there got, which was, it really was very challenging from the people that were there, and challenging in a good way, because there were people who had suffered discrimination all their lives, and were absolutely passionate to make sure that that discrimination is tackled, and the left is in absolutely no doubt about that. And it really did wake you up. You know, we talk about diversity, but they really got it across very strongly indeed in the language and the examples that they gave. And certainly I remember coming back on the train, all of us were sort of talking about this. And it's the obvious things, isn't it? As you look around this room and you think, we can be more diverse. You know, the people that contribute to these discussions can be more diverse. We need to be aware of the people that are out there that may not know about the national park, and we need to be positive in making contact with them. I mean, I know we're doing all of this stuff, but the conference highlighted all of this, and of course we need to do more. And there's various ways in which we can do more. So it was yeah, quite an influence from that point of view. The other point is to say it was also very enjoyable, as Joel sort of hinted as well. I'd certainly recommend members go, both for the things that you hear, the people you talk to. We talked about earlier about what are other national parks doing. It's a great way of just walk into a room and chat to anybody from any of the national parks, find out what they're doing. So exchange of information, having a good time, being challenged, coming back with ideas that we'll be talking about and feeding through into the things that we do and the decisions that we take. So I'd recommend any member to go on the one in a couple of years' time. It was excellent. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. So I was just, John, I was just going to go to Clive and George quickly as other members that went to the conference, and I'll come back to you. Is that okay?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it was very challenging, first bit of it. And no one has actually said what the comments were, but the comments were only people who can look after, work or play in the national park are middle-aged, middle-class people. And that was brought to give us a bit of a buzz, make us think, because I know it's not true, but is it? And George came straight in, and I'd asked George to actually say what he said about it at the meeting. Because he is certainly not middle-aged, but it was actually brought for a reason, this comment, that no one else, no ethnic people have the right or are able to use the national park. Well, no, sure.
The point I made is about access, and the national park should be available to everyone, regardless. Not only, I mean, we discussed today about diversity in one aspect, but there are also other ways of diversity as well, related to people's experience, backgrounds, accessibility. And I think it is easy sometimes to talk about the people's age, for example, gender or skin color, but also there are other important aspects that as we are as members of the national parks family, we should ensure that people have access to national park, whether it is public transport, for example, because there are some people who don't drive, who can't drive, who don't want to drive, so they also need to have access to the national park. So how do we facilitate that? So public transport, for example, is something that I feel very strongly about. So that's one way to incorporate access, facilitate access to the national parks, maintaining the footpaths that we have, investing in them, making the gate more accessible for people on mobility scooters and other ways of walking aids is again important to make sure that people can enjoy the national park. And finally, on today's celebration about the Act of 1949, the name of the act is National Parks and Access to the Countryside. So access is such an important thing, and for us to be an inclusive national park, it is about providing access to everyone, not only the points that were talked about, personal characteristics, but also the other characteristics about mobility, whether people can drive, and physical access, which we should not discriminate against.
Thanks, George. That's my thing. People did think about that. We did look at those sort of things at that. Anyway, on the Wednesday, we were split into small groups, and we went off to various places. Tom went to one of the better places where the drinks were, but not to say we didn't. We had to go. We went to the Sill and then on to a farm. Anyway, the Sill, we were shown around the Sill, and of course, then we were shown the new exhibition at the Sill to do with the loss of the tree, which was very close to the Sill, actually, where it happened. And they'd commissioned a person to, or an artist, to actually do the project, and it was to be opened, as we went on the Wednesday, it was to be opened on the Friday by, I think it was about 200 children from about 12 local schools. Anyway, we were given a preview of it, and we were introduced to the artist, and he showed us around it. Very inspiring, very clever the way it was done. And I think that would be a great success. then we actually went on to a farm. My goodness, was that farm bleak? Incredibly bleak. And it was part of the FIPL projects. So the owner was showing us how they were trying to diversify slightly by bringing in very slowly tourism, holiday lets within the property and that sort of thing. But was very challenging to her as well. This person had actually come from the south of England as a large farmer down there and wanted to diversify and slowly just take on a smaller property in the Yorkshire Dales, Northumberland. But I think she was finding it very challenging as well. I mean, it was incredibly bleak. Most of the farm was peat bog with a few fields, and I mean a few fields, which had been obviously in the past were bogs, but being slowly generated into workable fields. She then took us down across the peat bogs, which incredibly hard to walk on, I found anyway. They're very, very, very spongy. And halfway through the walk, she actually got these rods out, which was amazing. About 4 foot long each rod, which connected together, and she pushed them straight down into the peat. And there must have been 10 rods which went straight down before she hit rock bottom. And she pulled it out and said, when that point was actually first established was 3,000 years ago, and it's taken 3,000 years to get that peat to to where it was now. It was quite, crikey, and it was really amazing. So we must look after those places. Then we did go and have a look at some walls which had been put up especially for the sheep during the winter months to hide behind when it's snowing. Actually, most of the winter, I'd have thought, but that's what it was for. Specially designed so that they could always find a shelter point on it. Then we went a bit further, but it was only a bit further, and it was incredible. There was this stone which was circular and on its own, and just there. And they said, well, this stone has actually come from the west, complete west of the country, further up, and had been bowled down by snow and that from the Ice Age and pushed down there, and that's what made it round, and it just deposited there as it was going back. The climate was going back to normal. So, and it was one stone, just one stone on its own, and it's the only one around there. They haven't found another one. So it's just remarkable that, that it's actually pushed what was the equivalent of probably about 70 miles had pushed that stone. And I found that very, very interesting. Then we went back to the sill, and it was incredibly good. One of the things about the trees, with of course the sycamore trees, was of course they're now got saplings, and they were actually showing us the saplings there, or a few of the saplings, and there was 49 saplings produced, and that was one for every foot of the height of the cedar tree before it was felled. So that's why they have them. They are actually going to plant these trees throughout the country, and there was around about 500 applicants for this for these trees. I don't know. Well, obviously, there's a few which were successful. One which was successful was the Rob Burrows Foundation, which is building a centre in the hospital at Leeds, and one of them is going to be tried there. And these trees are going to be called the hope trees. So really appropriate for Rob. But we've also been given one, and I don't know it's going to be planted. Tom will know. Yeah, you do know, Tom. He'll bring it up later. I think, and that was really my time at the very, very good. I thought it was. I've been to a few of the conferences, and to be honest, I was a bit worried with going to have it in the middle of a city, but it's probably the best one I've been to. It was very, very enjoyable. I got a lot out of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Clive. John.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, I'm really pleased that members who were able to, and officers who were able to attend this conference, did feel that they were being challenged, particularly in terms of governance, because that's what we want as a governing body. We want to be challenged. We want outside organisations to change the way that we think about certain issues. So it's really good, really good to hear. And a brief observation that the programme of the conference was sponsored, looked to be was sponsored by Tarmac, and you don't immediately think of that association being able to attract a corporate sponsor like Tarmac. But of course, most of the people who visit national parks do so in their own motor cars and travel on roads to get to national parks. I just thought it was interesting, but that's all I wanted to say, Jim.
Quite interesting, but we've got to remember, Tarmac actually have the biggest quarry in the Yorkshire Dales, and that's why they do it, because they are looking after the Dales. That's why they sponsor it.
Sure, I was going to say that I don't know if it's why they sponsored it, but Tarmac do have significant mineral resource in Northumberland National Park. Tom.
Yeah, I'm just to add a few things. I think first off, by point of clarification, the sampling of the excellent gin at the Heppel Estate wasn't just because I know it's really good gin, but it was deliberately to visit the Heppel Estate and understand the rewilding programme that the estate is on a journey towards, and try and compare and contrast with our own experience through the Lincoln Lewisham projects. And you've always got to be careful about the pejorative nature of talking about rewilding, but it was great talking to the landowner about his own, I suppose, psychological conversion of being a traditional estate manager focused on shooting, forestry and agriculture, and moving to a transition where actually the sort of focus is on giving experiences on the gin side of the business, but also on looking at how the whole of the estate delivers more for nature and biodiversity by working with a local tenant farmer who remains a tenant on the farm. And that transition and understanding what had kind of flicked the switch in his mind, I think, is really instructive, because we have to work with private farmers and landowners and work with them as allies in trying to deliver national park purposes. So trying to understand how he'd gone about it and what had kind of convinced him about a different way of doing business, I thought was really instructive. Like the members, I mean, at the end of the first day, I felt a bit beaten up, and I had a conversation with my counterpart in Northumberland, Tony, who led the conference with his team, who did a remarkable job, but also is passionate, rightly so, about equality, diversity, and inclusion. Leads our National Parks EDI group, and Tony said something to me that really made me think. And my feeling at the end of the conference was I felt significantly, whereas I started off feeling quite powerless, I actually felt much more empowered at the end of it about the leadership role that I have as chief executive with my team, but also the leadership role that we have as National Park Authority. And there were two strap lines that really stuck with me through the course of the 2 days. First one was nothing about us without us. And that speaks to the point about it's really important that when we make decisions, we understand and make them with the voices of those people who are involved. And we'll pick up a little bit about the EDI group that we've set up, making sure that group feels that it's got an ability to genuinely influence decisions that are made by the National Park, and policy is really important. The same goes for our youth voice as well, and Joel mentioned that earlier. And then the final one was, we'll talk about it in due course for members, I think early in the new year, Joel, but the work that we worked on behalf of national parks with an external community interest company called the Soil Collective, who were brought in as co-creators with us to develop a vision for inclusion in national parks, and they gave us some really powerful messages, but also quite empowering messages about the language that we could use that really ensures that our national parks are inclusive, welcoming places. But it, in particular, the phrase stuck with me was about moving from a position where we see ourselves as being passive allies to being active comrades. And that really did make me think, and certainly in the role that we play in, as I say, in the leadership role within the landscape, making sure we do call it out and we do speak in favour of diversity, and we do particularly try and welcome those who might have felt othered. We don't want anybody who comes to this national park to feel othered. We don't want people who don't come to this national park to feel othered. This is a national parks were created for the nation, and it's really important that they're seen as inclusive, welcoming places.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, you took a couple of things I was going to say, so I crossed those off. But I just like, on the theme of the conference, I wonder whether Clive Stone felt welcome when he got there after that long journey and being so different from its surroundings. But I do think, I mean, it was great to have the young people there as well, actually. It's always great to see what other parks are doing on the ground. And, part of it's about the theme, but a lot of it's just about mixing with your counterpart members, chairs, and that's always a really productive time. But I do think, going back to what we can what we can do, we made an investment to go there, and we need to do something about it. And I think just taking a little bit more care and a little bit more time to really look at the things that we kind of maybe attempted to tick as boxes. And if you just have another look, maybe it's not just quite as you thought it was. And I think also, just in the last item we touched about governance, but we've made a commitment here to do some co-options, and I see that as a much more practical and accessible way for us to get people who can help us with these things, and make us be seen to be trying to do that. And I think being seen to be trying is a really important part of that. So I mean, as we get along, we have got some young people co-options, which is it's getting going. We need some work to do. It's getting going. We can talk about that in a different forum. And also we had sort of some commitment to EDA co-options or outreach, and that's still something that we could do if we felt it was appropriate. And to me, I think that would be a much more practical way of moving that forward than waiting for DEFRA to change our governance. So, but really good conference. I think my personal takeaway, and I like to think of myself as quite a broad-minded person, but what I did think was, I may be thinking that inside, but what are others looking at me thinking? They're probably thinking that TWA thing that's stood on the top of my hill. And I think that I took that away. I just thought, actually, how you are may not be how others see you. So I think, Joel, you were going to give us a presentation on the soil collective or that at when, because it would be nice to have something in the programme to look at this in our business.
So that's planned for the January members update. The exact date offhand would be about the 14th, I think, yeah.
Yeah, so we're So, so it's reports from members and outside bodies. Sorry, thanks, Tom. Reports from members on the committees and forums, and then it's outside bodies. It's Colin first.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I'll take it as read, but there's just one point that after the meeting on Monday the 11th, we got Deloitte had actually signed off the pension audit, which was about a year behind times. They must have had some big problems that they couldn't actually get the pension audit finished off. And we now move forward for 23-24, which Forvis Mazars are doing both the authority audit and the pension audit. So, you know, we don't need to wait for two different firms to do it. But I'll take the report as read. It was difficult because trying to condense 100 pages of agenda down to these, but I think I got most points in it. And, but any questions, if I can't answer them, somebody will. But thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks for doing that piece of work. Any questions for Colin? No, you've done it, Colin. Yeah, thanks very much. So next it is Janet.
Thank you. I'll follow Colin's lead and hopefully get the same reaction. I will take it as read too. It was a very big agenda. We covered a lot of big issues at the meeting, and I'm very grateful for the contributions of members. The only thing I would like to draw your attention to today is on page 131, just so that nobody ever thinks that anything's trying to be covered in the detail. And this is about the Village Services Scheme, which is going to come to an end in September 2025. This is an officer decision. It has been made, but they have brought it to members' attention and it has been scrutinised. So I just want you to be aware that there is work ongoing, but that particular scheme is going to cease on the 30th of September 2025, and there will be discussions about what happens next. So that's all I want to say on this, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. Questions for Janet? It's a comprehensive report. And thanks for bringing the village services situation to our attention. As you say, you know, that's as it is. What we do next is important and for discussion. Who's next? Is it Patrick?
No.
No.
I can be very brief because
you can be as you think's appropriate.
Well, the substantive item that we considered was the soil collective outputs and the report, which we referred to, and in particular the opportunity to share the 10 principles for belonging, and also this notion of how we can take action. And as Tom alluded to earlier, this idea of moving away from just simply being quite passive around access, and actually being a bit more active in terms of being, as they call it, active comradeship. And then we had a very interesting discussion, sort of what does that mean for the authority? And I think the first thing we really wanted to underline was the fact that this kind of discussion is something that needs to happen in lots of varied ways and at varied levels. So it's important it doesn't just get boxed off into this is an EDI group issue and we'll take it, but actually collectively this needs to happen. And so we did a session with staff last Thursday on this, Obviously today it's been mentioned, and then next month with members as well, and we'll keep going back to it. The idea is that from that we will continue to then understand some of the practical things to take that forward, and how we continue to sort of challenge and scrutinise ourselves in thinking about some of these hidden ways in which actually we may not be as welcoming or as inclusive as we could be, and how we could go further as part of this. The other element that we looked at, similar to the Recreation and Wellbeing Forum, we looked at the targeted transport review. Targeted transport is that layer which is below public transport, but it's very much around specific ability for groups to be able to get access to the national park, and in particular looking at the resources that we've got for that, how we can grow those, but also the kinds of groups or ways in which we need to support groups in order to enable that. And a lot of this is being done in the context of Objective 13 in the management plan, around increasing access for those that are currently underserved in adjacent communities. And so again, there was a very good discussion about how we can move that forward, and the review will be the thing that will unlock that. So 2 substantive items from EDI last Thursday, Chair.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. Virgil.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, John, for the updates. I did invite myself to that meeting as well, because there was an item about changing places in Helmsley, which I thought was extremely important, and we had a very good discussion about it at the start of the meeting, and hopefully some progress and updates about that project will be forthcoming in the next meeting of EDI, and I would appreciate it if I can stay up to date with the work that's being done towards achieving a positive contribution to Helmsley and attracting more visitors to the national park. Because it's also related to the discussion about accessibility we discussed earlier, so it does in very nicely with access to national parks and protected areas, and it would be helpful to achieve that.
Thanks, George. And the recreation and wellbeing and EDI, for the reason we've just been discussing, are quite closely linked in some ways, aren't they? So, right. Any more questions for John that Joel can answer? No? Great. Well, thanks ever so much, John and Joel, for bringing us that update. Extra on, it's not on the agenda, but Patrick.
I was going to say, Chair, it's not on the agenda. I would very much like to update on the Conservation and Climate Change Forum. We met on the 1st of October, and there's a full minute of that meeting on the members' website. The meeting was split into 2. First half, we had really excellent presentations from officers, including Mark Antcliffe and Sam Newton and Tom Stevenson, about really the tree and woodland strategy across the national park. And although we've heard earlier this morning that we might be behind target on planting woodland, I can assure you there's plenty of effort going on and a lot of thought into this subject. So do read the notes on that. But I don't want to take up too much time, but just to update you on the second half of the meeting on October the 1st was an update from officers about the nature recovery plan that the authorities were preparing. And we thought at the end of that meeting it would be useful to have an individual meeting just to talk about this nature recovery plan. Very briefly, because it's complicated, I'm sure, but forgive me if you all know this. Every local authority's got to produce a local nature recovery strategy. And as part of that, to support North Yorkshire Council and Tees Valley Tees Valley Authority combined, thank you. We are producing a nature recovery plan, not a strategy, a plan. And that document has been prepared, and I think is absolutely excellent, by Bryony and Elspeth and their team. And last week, we held a forum, this time last week, going through that document, which I think it's been circulated to all members here, tweaking it really, editing it. The officers have been working on this for more than a year. And really what it does, very briefly, is it sets out the priorities and actions needed to, as we think as an authority, that will deliver nature recovery across the national park. So it's a really important document. absolutely supports our management plan and our business plan, as we've been hearing about this morning. Those of us who attended it, I think we are more than satisfied with it. I think it's a very good document. It will then, Bryony might have to help me in a minute, but this document will then be passed on as a draft to North Yorkshire Council and Tees Valley, and they will use it to inform their own strategies, which will be published at some point next year. I think Tees Valley will come out roughly in the summer, and North Yorkshire one I think will be later in the year. So really key document, and I think a really excellent one.
Can I just follow up with some additional information? So the Nature Recovery Plan will feed into the drafts, as Patrick said, for TBCA and North Yorkshire Council. They have to be signed off by the local nature recovery strategies, have to be signed off by the supporting authorities, of which we are one. So the draft for Tees Valley Combined Authority is already under consultation, so that will come to us probably, I would think, in January. We would intend then for it to go to the Conservation and Climate Change Forum to be reviewed with a recommendation potentially in March for us to adopt that draft for it to go into the next phase, and then there will be a similar process once that draft's been approved by all the supporting authorities, that it would then be developed into the final draft, come back to us again later in the year, again go to Conservation and Climate Change Forum, and again then be brought to full authority to be signed off probably sometime in the summer, maybe the June NPA. If those timelines don't align, then we might have to sign them off virtually, but we do have to sign them off before they become the sort of statutory local nature recovery strategy. And we'll go through the same process with North Yorkshire Council. They're intending to get their draft to us sometime before March, with again the intention that that would be signed off in at the March NPA, but their final won't be ready until quite a bit later into the year. So imagine maybe the autumn NPA for that to be finally signed off. But those dates are still a bit fluid. And again, like I said, if they don't align with our NPA meetings, we might have to sign them off virtually on recommendation from the Conservation and Climate Change Forum.
Thanks, Bryony. It's quite complicated.
Any questions for Patrick? David?
Yeah, thanks. Just a comment on, I'm involved at the local nature recovery strategy with North Yorkshire Council and the climate change champion role. Just a concern I have, been to one or two of these meetings, and I don't know whether you got it at these meetings here. Have we got enough farmers buying into this? Have we got farmers that are taking an interest in what we're doing? I just felt that some of the ones I've been to, plenty of advisors there, but not too many farmers, and it's key that we do engage with the farmers.
Absolutely fair question. In the plan, the draft plan we've got, farming is one of, has its own specific chapter, its own specific, and there are also priorities for grassland as well as trees woodland. So I think farming is covered pretty well on our own plan. The consultation events happened, I think, throughout this year, starting at the beginning of this year, didn't they? So there have been plenty of opportunities, my understanding, but I haven't been to them all, for farmers to be there, and farming is very much referenced in here. So I hope and think it is covered, and have a look at the policies in this plan, because I think they are farming friendly.
Just come back, it wasn't the actual, there's no doubt they are covered, it was just, have we got farmers buying into this?
Yeah,
that's the key. That was the key thing.
I don't have enough experience at the consultation events to be able to comment. Bryony looks as if she can.
Yeah, there's been specific consultation events for farmers, both here in the North York Moors and in the Yorkshire Dales, and more broadly as well, over the development of the local nature recovery plan, which is obviously for us, but also the local nature recovery strategy as well. So lots of farmers have been engaged in workshops and events to talk through what the local nature recovery strategy is saying. And one of the reasons that the publication has been delayed is because there's a significant aspect of the local nature recovery plan which has kind of achieved a bit more prominence over the last year, which is around how the local nature recovery strategy is presented graphically and geographically using maps. So that's made the local nature recovery strategy teams want to hold some more consultations with farmers and land managers just to be really sure about how they're presenting local nature recovery action spatially, so that farmers and land managers know and understand that these are ideals, they're not directives, so that farmers aren't feeling like there's a cohort of people up here who are telling them what to do with their land. So I think there's a lot of work being undertaken to ensure that local nature recovery plan and strategies both feature not just what we think farmers should be doing, but what also farmers are, making sure they understand what the process is and also what the opportunities there are in being involved in the local nature recovery strategy. I mean, as with all of these things, we can always do more, but I think we've put a lot of effort into, or there has been a lot of effort put into farmers being represented properly in that development of those strategies.
George.
Yes, I was.
Oh, sorry.
I forgot it now. I was going to say to confirm that because there have been 2 sets of workshops that are organised as part of the LNRS, one at the start of the year and one more recently. I attended the one in Thirst that took place earlier, and the one in Ripon last month, I think. And on both occasions, there have been a large number of members from the farming community who were in attendance. So I'm not concerned about that. I think the word has gone out through North Yorkshire about the LNRS, and there is a good representation. And in fact, there is still one more event to take place on the 21st of January. That, I think, is the last one. That is in York. So I think it's important to reach out to everyone, but farming must be represented in those consultations because they play a key part in delivering that strategy, and I'm reassured that every effort has been done at North Yorkshire Council and the North York Moors to achieve that.
Thanks, George. Anybody else? I just like to congratulate Patrick on calling an extra meeting to do this because that's just what the forum should be doing, isn't it? And hopefully, it was disappointing that it was only Malcolm and I could get there with Patrick, but nonetheless, we had a really good look at it, and I think made some constructive comment that might help develop the strategy. I know there's a long way to go before it's finalised, but it was great to have a bit of a look at, on the journey, and I say that was really valuable. Congratulate Patrick on that. I think there isn't a lot of resource at the moment identified in the strategy, and that's maybe why farmers and land managers haven't actually engaged, because there's an awful lot of transition going on in the farming industry, and most people are worried and stretched on all sorts of fronts as to what the future holds and trying to plot their way through it. And so it's understandable that they're going to follow the things that have the biggest financial challenge or impact or stakes, the highest stakes. But I think that this could sneak through because this is after all strategic policy, and although nobody much sees the money there, if the LERB bill and our management plans come up the list of priorities for land management funding, our nature recovery strategy will guide the things on the ground that those things are going to do. We need to make sure that the options for our people on the ground are both achievable and sustainable financially. So I think it's a really important piece of work, and well done, Patrick. Well done, Patrick, for calling it in.
Thank you.
Next, now we've got to reports from members of outside bodies. I think there's one from David. So we have was the trust? Was it Clive? What did you have to talk about the trust?
Yes, I've got to apologise. I had quite a busy night last night. It was Rural Watch. We started at 8 o'clock and we finished at 3 this morning. So I got 3 hours sleep and I forgot to bring the report with me. So what I'll do is I'll email everybody the report, if that's okay, later today, and pass it on. But if there's anything anyone else wants to say from the Trust, please go ahead.
But maybe ask Patrick if you'd like to task Tom with giving you any extra updates.
Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it very briefly. So the North Yorkshire Trust met, I think, about 10 days ago. Latest trustees meeting. We signed off some important policies that are required as part of our own suite of policies as an independent charity. There's one area around safeguarding where we felt as trustees we needed some further advice before we were able to sign off a policy in that area. The rest of the meeting was taken up with various updates on projects and additional funding that James, as the director of the Trust, has been able to achieve, primarily from Rounson's Coffee and Whitby Distillery, which have been brilliant to bring those two companies to work in partnership with the Trust and help us with some project activity. He gave an update on the Trust Treks project, working with Andy's Man Club, and has started a conversation with Middlesbrough Mind about extending that concept out to a slightly wider group of people, based on the initial success of working with people through Andy's Man Club, and the Stepping Stones to Nature project, which has been working with two schools from deprived areas in Teesside, trying to build the sort of initial contextual knowledge of young kids around being out in nature just within their immediate surroundings. And the trustees approved the use of some reserves to continue that project until the end of April. Final bit of the meeting was just a little bit of an update on governance. So members will recall we had a paper at the last National Park Authority meeting about a strategic review of the Trust, which includes a governance review of the Trust. We're taking steps through the charity to amend the charity's governing document, which is its Articles of Association, to amend the charitable purposes or objects of the charity so that it's much more explicit that it can and should focus on the delivery of health and wellbeing benefits to communities through the national park, and also to change the governance so that there's no longer a mandatory requirement for the chief executive of the National Park Authority to be the chair of the trust. And that process has now started. We notified the Charity Commission last week of one regulated amendment, which is around the objects of the charity, which we need to do prior to approving those amendments, which will happen at a special general meeting sometime in the early part of the new year.
Go on, David.
I was looking at my report on the local access forum. Is it at an appropriate time, or are you still on the brief?
Well, unless there's any more questions on the trust. Go on then.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, having heard Clive's report on what he was doing, it gives me the confidence to deliver this one. Because I wasn't there, I was hybrid to it, and I thought, well, don't worry, George will be there. He'll look after it. But George was a hybrid as well, and it was a little bit challenging, wasn't it, George, trying to get through to the getting the chair's attention. But things that we did cover, we covered Lincoln Levisham project, we covered the Northern Gateway master planning, talk about green lanes, and also a bit on the Moors bus. And as always, with every access, whatever we're on, we seem to end up talking about coast to coast. And remarkably, even though it's not in the national park, the crossing of the A19 at Ingleby Arncliffe always gets a mention as well. But it's only about a mile off the boundary. And I just want to finish really with a thought or two of my own on this
on this crossing. The fact it's now been paused anyway, but I've just had sight of some costs, and it was going to cost a bridle way was going to cost between 7.25 and 7.474 million, and whereas the footbridge was going to be, I want to say just, but it was going to be 4 million. So there's a great link there. Obviously, there's a need to consider all users, but I think really having to accommodate horses as well is going to be a real showstopper on that. And it's unfortunate because this coast to coast, it's a jigsaw that is probably nearly done apart from this one crossing. And so that's a real shame that we haven't got that one done. And that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thanks, David. You got a question for David, George?
Yes, because David mentioned that I was at that meeting as well as a representative of North Yorkshire Council, not National Park. And thanks to Judith, she facilitated the virtual attendance of me. So it was very clear, and I was able to listen to all the conversation that was there. The Moors bus had a good mention. I raised this issue because I think it's a very important one, but also the coast to coast walk. I know you mentioned it's always the same issue, that the same difficulty is mentioned in every meeting, not only of the North York Moors National Park Local Access Forum, but also the North Yorkshire Council Local Access Forum. But the reason why it's so important is because it's a key part to ensure access to the whole coast to coast, which obviously is very relevant for the North York Moors.
Thanks, George. And I think having some surety about what's going to happen is important, because if they divert the path, or if you need to know one or the other so that people can invest appropriately. Anyway, thank you for raising that, David. I got a written report from David Jeffels. I don't think there's anything more on outside bodies, is there? Have we missed anything more? Okay, thanks very much. On to Parish Forum update then, which is there for your consideration. Any questions, or was there anything to raise? Colin?
Yes, Chair. Sorry. Just one on the coastal area Parish Forum. Brian gave the presentation on Birds on the Edge and Reconnect River-esque project. It'd be nice if we'd have one of them on the northern area as it goes through, the Esk goes through, and it'll keep us up to date. We might get more people to attend on that, if possible.
And it is for the forum to set its agenda, so I think that's in your gift, Colin, to do that if you want to. Yeah, I mean, it's an important thing that the forums set their own agendas. Malcolm?
Yeah, can you say on the Western Forum we have kind of a varied range of views about things about biodiversity and that sort of thing. So we had a very useful discussion about those at the meeting.
Okay. The recommendation is that the... Sorry, Christine, I missed you. No, go ahead.
Well, I was just curious. I mean, it's mentioned in the notes that there's a sense that the attendance at these is fairly low. And so there's, I guess, just a question in my mind is, given the fact they have the ability to set their own agendas, etc., that's fine. But I don't know if there's something about the topics that we're choosing that aren't attracting people, if there's more that we need to do to promote them, or if in fact, you know, at some point we want to reconsider whether this is the right approach to engage the people, you know, in the communities. We spoke earlier in this meeting about the need to get that local engagement, the need to get farmers engaged with things. And it seems to me if we're only getting a handful of people to these meetings, it's not being very effective. So just a question to consider.
No, I think that's a challenge well put, and one that we're well aware of. And I forget, was it about a year ago we sort of had a talk about this, tried to re-engage them by making the authority parish members the chairs of the forums. But and they do set their own agendas. it's certainly it's. I mean, and the Southern Forum wasn't badly attended this time. It often isn't. But I'm aware when I look at the number of parishes that are represented there and the number of parishes who are absent, and I think, well, why are you absent? And it's something. I don't know if you have any extra comment on. I mean, it's a really important thing to engage with our parishes, and because they link into our governance and they appoint some members, and it should be a really strong thing. But people only seem to show up when there's a fire burning. To be honest,
I mean, from my point of view, I really welcome the challenge. Just because we've done something in one way doesn't mean to say that we always have to do it like that. And we regularly ask ourselves as officers about whether there's a better way of doing this. We haven't come up with an answer yet, but it does put the parish forums put an awful lot of an onus on staff time, particularly Judith's time, but also officer time as well. We put a high importance on engagement with local communities, but it's clear that engagement through the parish council vehicle isn't always getting that. So we need to find a way that helps us to engage really effectively with local communities. And if there's a better way of doing it than our current parish forum setup, then I'm certainly all ears.
Malcolm?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're dead right. It's right that we look at the challenges and whether we're doing it properly and whether we can do it better. A couple of points I'd make. One is, if you look at the number of parishes in the Western Forum, there's a huge number where the communities don't live in the park. And the side just by the boundaries, and the boundaries come, and you get a little bit of countryside in the national park, so they're included. So there's I think there's about 30 odd parishes that can vote for me, and usually about 9 do. So 9 are actually involved in the election of it, and I suspect it's because of that reason. And the other point is that it's clearly quite away from Ingleby Green now down to Coxwold, and the thing that we find is that if the location is very much to the south, people from the north maybe don't come as often, and vice versa. The only final point I'd say is the ones that do, we've got some regular attenders, and we have some very good discussions. So just points to bear in mind.
George?
Thank you, Chair. I did attend the one in Coxwold, and the turnout was consistent with previous ones, which was not great and could always be better. But it is also a substantial number of people who were there, who took the effort to be there on a dark autumn evening. My question is obviously, how do we promote and let people know about those forums? And I think this is probably a question to Judith. Is it sent to the clerks of the parishes, or are they sent to also the councillors themselves? Because we had a similar situation in a different setting where sometimes the clerks are not always forwarding the information. But if we can contact the parish representatives directly, widen the circulation list, maybe there could be a significant increase in the number of people who attend rather than we limit ourselves to the clerks.
Yes, we do send everything to the clerks. We send a poster because we want the public to attend too. It isn't just for parish councillors, it is for communities as a whole. So we ask them to put it on their notice boards. I went to Huttonley Hole once, they were hosting it. There was nothing on their notice board. So they knew they were hosting it, but they didn't actually put, and I print them out if they want and send them in the post. The difficulty with parish councillors is we don't know who they are. The website to North Yorkshire Council doesn't actually list the parish councillors. So to actually find out who they are would be quite a major amount of work. Those that I have sent it to, where they've asked when we've been at the meeting, they then email me and say, why am I getting these? Why should I attend? So it's very mixed. But we do send an update to the parish clerks as well, so that it stimulates questions. But we got nil response on that, so we hand it out at the meeting. it is just very difficult. Sometimes we get a lot of attendees, other times we just get nobody.
Yeah, so that was exactly my point, that sometimes we contact the clerks, but they don't take the next step of sharing with the community or with their members. And you're right, it is a major undertaking to try to find the details of every single parish council councillors across the area. So I mean, it could be that we need to find a way to reach out to larger audience when we are organizing those, given the amount of effort that already takes in the preparation. Because if we're not going to invest in letting people know about those events, we might rather not invest in having excellent content, as the one I enjoyed listening to when I was in Coxwold. So both promotion and content are equally important.
Thanks, George. I'm relatively new to being a parish member, and I've tried several things. I haven't found a breakthrough yet, but there's a few more things that I think we could do, and I think it is important to try. But then also, we found that actually, making sure that you host a forum somewhere where they don't usually host it. And so instead of just going to the usual people who say, come to us next, if you actually specifically go to a different place, you do get different people. And so, yeah, good challenge. And I'm not quite sure where we'll think about it, but we will. Heather.
Just to say, sorry, appreciate the challenges. We've been around this before, haven't we? Unfortunately, I couldn't make the one we had at Skinny Grove. The joint forum. We seem to get quite a few members. I'd be interested to know whether they just come for the food, really. But there we go. No, seriously. But I mean, that was quite well attended, and I gather. I'm sorry, I say I couldn't make it, but maybe it would be better just having two of those a year than having these in officers' time. Can we not? Would that be better officers' time spent? You're right. We should try it. We've tried this before. We haven't. I mean, I appreciate doing anything possible, but as I say, even at the Northern Forum, it's very, 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 very small number of people there. Colin, we talk more. Colin was had other matters on. Seriously, but it was very. At times, I've been where there's as many officers as there are people taking part, which is, it's not what we're about really. I'd rather have two things a year than having so many, and it might get them up. That's just something to look at. As I say, interesting, Judith, to know how many people were at the joint forum, but I understand it was quite, worthwhile trip. Okay.
60 usually, 50 to 60.
Well, okay. Two of those, 120 people. Anyway, okay. Thank you.
I've got to completely agree with George on this. At the coastal one, there was myself, David Jeffels, one other person, and then the officers. That was it. And the talks were absolutely brilliant. Bernie gave an absolute brilliant thing about local footpaths right through all their areas, but they didn't come. But one of the big problems I've always said, and certainly with our parish council, shouldn't say it out loud, is it being recorded? They do not tell us when the meetings are. The clerk does not tell us. I have pushed and pushed and pushed for that, but they still refuse to actually say when these meetings are. When I bring it up, it's usually after the meeting. Said, "Have you had notification?" And they say, "Oh yes, we had notification." Why didn't you bring it up? Well, I didn't think we needed to, and that's the attitude, unfortunately, with some of them. Probably not with Jules, but but that is a problem. So the parish councillors are not getting to find out when these meetings are.
Okay. I think that rather than chewing over the detail here, but I think it is something that we'll keep under review. I think that would be the right way to do it. So that's parish forum update. I think are we on to any other business? The only matter I have, I think, there's two things. One is that somehow I think we did have some private minutes, but they're just minutes to approve. We sort of haven't somehow got those on.
They were approved at the last meeting.
All right, so we
There
have.
were no minutes from the last meeting.
So there's no private business. Brilliant. that clears that up then. And Tom, just before members break for their lunch, we need some of you, or as many as you can after,